Can I advise members and those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are on airplane mode and that all devices are muted. They can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rolls. It is not permitted to take photographs or record any of this meeting. Can I inform members that there are 3 oral evidence sessions which will be Hansarded. Agenda item number 1 is apologies. I have an apology for Declan Kearney. Any other apologies? Declan, yeah. Sorry, Sammy Douglas, did he say it'd be late? Okay. Any other apologies? No, okay. Agenda item number 2 then is draft minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of October 2016. Now for members to the minutes held on that date on pages 5 to 10 of the meeting pack. Can I ask members if they are content with the minutes, that they are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting? By all signed. Members agreed? Okay. Agenda item number 3 then is matters arising. Item number 1, review of sentencing policy issues. Can I refer members to pages 12 to 21 of the meeting pack of the relevant papers? Can I remind members that at last week's meeting, Assembly researcher Ray McCaffrey presented his research paper on sentencing guidelines, mechanisms in other jurisdictions, international models of good practice and approaches employed to secure public confidence in sentencing. The committee had commissioned the research paper to inform its considerations of the Department's review of the sentencing policy issues. Can I remind members that the committee also considered a list of bodies the Department would draw on for both the policy development stages and in due course of full consultation. The Department has indicated that it is keen to ensure that no relevant views are excluded from the process and would therefore welcome any suggestions for inclusion on the list. The committee agreed that the list should be included in this week's pack to give members the opportunity to consider it further. Now, I had a look through this list. It's pretty extensive. I couldn't think of anybody who was left off the list. But could I seek the views of members on whether they wish to suggest any additional stakeholders for inclusion? Members content with the list? Okay, nothing to add then on that. Item number 2 then is the committee's forward work programme. Can I advise members that an updated forward work programme for October is at pages 22 to 24 of the meeting pack? Can I inform members that consideration of the draft committee report on the legislative consent motions relating to the Policing and Crime Bill cannot take place until after the LCMs have been laid in the Assembly? As this is unlikely to take place in the next couple of days, this item will be rescheduled to the meeting on the 10th of November. The oral briefing on the draft programme for government will also be rescheduled to that meeting if the documents are not published by next Monday. That's to ensure members have enough time to consider them. Can I ask members to note the forward work programme for October, unless there are any comments? Okay, members happy? Item number 3 then is fresh start funding. Can I inform members that a response has been received from the Department of Justice to the committee's request for further information on applications by the PSNI for fresh start funding to tackle organised crime. A copy of the correspondence is at page 3 of the tabled pack. Can I advise members that the Department has indicated that the PSNI has been allocated 1.123 million of fresh start funding in 2016-17 for a dedicated investigative capacity aimed at tackling organised crime and criminality linked to paramilitary groups. This is in support of Action C4 in the Executive Action Plan. Can I inform members that they can discuss this with officials if we wish later on in the evidence sessions? Members happy enough to park it till then? Agenda item number 4 then is a review of the Department of Justice Voluntary, Community and Social Enterprise Funding Sector Models, the results of the consultation and the proposed way forward. Can I remind members that at the meeting of the 30th of June, the committee noted the Department's intention to undertake a public consultation on a proposed new funding model for the voluntary, community and social enterprise sector and agreed to consider the proposals further when the results of the consultation were available. The committee also advised the Department that it was aware of concerns regarding the proposals from a number of the voluntary and community organisations and therefore wished to schedule an oral briefing, oral evidence session on the consultation results. Can I inform members that the departmental officials will attend the meeting today to outline the consultation results and proposed way forward? The relevant papers are at pages 26 to 66 of the meeting pack. Can I welcome to the committee meeting today Brian Grismick, Apologies. Grimac. Deputy Director, and also Guy Wardrop, Legacy Unit, Criminal Justice Policy and Legislation Division, Department of Justice, to the meeting and advise them that the session is being recorded by Hansard and the transcript will be published on the committee web page. Can I welcome you both to the meeting? I'm glad that we go in first name terms here. But without further ado, I'll ask you to lead off.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman. Perhaps over the next 5 or 10 minutes, I'll perhaps reset the context of this whole exercise. Okay. I'll say a bit about the consultation process itself and what came out of it, and perhaps finishing off by saying where we may go from there.
Okay, thank
you. Essentially, the voluntary community and social enterprise sector, which has made and continues to make a significant contribution to our society. Its work very much underpins and enhances the work of the justice system, both by delivering important victim and offender-focused services, but also informing policy across the justice system. The Department has built a very sound working relationship with the sector. Claire Sugden, our Minister, has emphasised her commitment to build and maintain robust working relationships based on effective partnership working. So that's very much driven our thinking. The proposed new funding model is strongly influenced by the Programme for Government, which is setting the strategic direction across government. Importantly, it's built on an outcomes-based approach, seeking to demonstrate the impact of its programmes on our community. The funding model reflects this outcome-based approach and is designed to assist the Department in targeting its expenditure in this sector to contribute positively to delivering against our strategic priorities. The model should also improve the processes involved and make the funding system much more intelligible, particularly to smaller bodies seeking funding. The proposed changes to the funding model are designed to promote transparency in funding, provide greater opportunity for all organisations in the sector to contribute to the Department's aims and objectives, strengthen and further develop a collaborative approach to service delivery, and deliver optimum, or certainly better focused impact in terms of use of the available resources. In essence, we want to ensure the fair and equitable funding of voluntary and community sector bodies that work with us. The system has to be fit for purpose, efficient and effective. I would perhaps stress that the model itself is cost neutral. It's designed to improve and refocus the allocative process. It makes no decisions about the quantum of funding going to any individual bodies. Improving the funding system and strengthening the relationships between the Department and the voluntary and community sector organisations will help support the sector and certainly the valuable work it provides in our community. The new system itself builds on good practice and will provide a uniform approach, or certainly a more consistent approach across the sector, and be phased in incrementally or rolled in over 3 years. So in essence, we're not going for a big bang approach, but rather a rolling approach as bodies funding comes up for renewal. This should allow the sector time to develop to the new approach, and for the Department itself to actually learn lessons as it rolls out and develop and its ideas. When looking at why we're changing the funding arrangements, the current arrangements have been developed on a piecemeal basis across the Department and are often based on historical funding practice. In essence, different parts of the Department have used different funding models over the years, and there isn't a consistency of approach. The Department's, as you all know, the Department's budget is under significant financial pressure. Much has been done to limit the cuts to the voluntary and community sector, but we recognise that pressures will remain. And it's clearly important that we ensure that where we do spend money, it gives us the best possible outcomes. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Department currently funds about 90 voluntary and community sector bodies annually. About 80% of that funding goes to 20% of those organisations. So there's about 20 bodies who really pick up the vast majority of the funding. The remainder is often small packets of grants. Annual funding runs to around about 5 million, with a further 3 million dispersed to the PCSPs, the police, and of course that covers both what they fund in terms of voluntary and community sector bodies, but also cover some of their central administration. Turning to the new model, as I said, the new model seeks to provide greater transparency of funding, fair and equitable access to funding, increased flexibility, and responsiveness of funding, linking it to our priorities. And in essence, achieving best value and certainly supporting partnership arrangements. Very briefly, the key components of the model are actually a strong focus on outcome-based accountability. So we're looking much more at the impact of money rather than the fact that processes have been paid for. It's certainly driven by the programme for government, and it's part of our changes coming out of the programme for government. The committee might wish to note that actually the sort of changes we're looking at here are being mirrored across other departments in government. We certainly are looking to move towards a full cost recovery approach. This is something which I think was the policy across governments in 2006, but has been imperfectly implemented since then. So we're really trying to address that. And we're certainly seeing co-design. A co-design approach is critical to actually how we make sure we tailor and shape the new arrangements and ensure that we get the best services, delivering the best outcomes at the best price. The consultation process, I'll just run through that quickly. It ran for about 12 weeks and was extended for a fortnight after several bodies asked for an extension. It was supported by NICFA and CO3, who were helpful both in giving us some advice on our policy, but also on the consultation approach. And both organisations alerted their membership to the consultation and encouraged them to participate. We issued invitations to about 120 bodies, encouraging them to participate in the process. NICFA and CO3 also reminded their members and encouraged them to join. We held two consultation events, one in Belfast and one in Derry, with about, I think, 40 people attending between the two of them. Additionally, we had some separate meetings with individual bodies where they asked for them. And overall, actually, that was a very productive and positive process, which certainly helped us shape our thinking. On the consultation responses, we received 26 written responses from a wide range of organisations, including academics, local government, advocacy groups, funding organisations, large groups in the sector, and some smaller community groups. That was in addition to some of the conversations we had on the margins of our events in Derry and Belfast. Looking at the analysis of the consultation, 25 of the 26 organisations welcomed the initiative. Excuse me. Welcomed the initiative overall, and there was general support for the proposals. Responses overall to the consultation questions were assessed as being very positive. One body, I think, actually responded saying, in fact, this was all about cuts and they didn't like any of it. But other than that, actually, we had some very considered and actually very helpful responses from a number of bodies. Most respondents, about 18 of the 26, supported the funding approach being more aligned with departmental priorities. Only 2 felt that wasn't appropriate. Most respondents supported, and indeed a number of them practiced, full cost recovery. I have to say 5 respondents did register some concern and asked for further clarity. The vast majority, some 23 of the 26, supported the use of co-design. Several organisations did ask to collaborate with the department on developing and shaping the practice in this area, which we thought was very helpful. The use of outcome-based accountability received broad support. I think only two of the respondents didn't support that approach. A number did suggest that the smaller voluntary community sector bodies would require some support in areas like measuring impact. And I think what we did say to them at the time was really the whole model in terms of actually measurement of outcome would have to be proportionate. Clearly, where our body is receiving a small amount of money, the amount of actually testing the measurement would be quite different in terms of demand on that body than from a large body with a multi-million pound or a £100,000 project. There was some support for the view that the proposals would provide greater opportunity for organisations to bid for funding. Now, in fairness, actually, the majority of respondents were neutral or didn't comment. I think 10 supported the view it would actually provide greater opportunities, and 3 disagreed. A slight majority of respondents thought the new proposal would provide greater transparency and confidence in the funding system. One organisation disagreed. I think that, again, points to us the fact that we need to, as this rolls out, we need to engage with bodies to make sure that they understand the process and are able, supported to work within it. looking at the next steps, and I'm pretty well finished here, the policy is now being reviewed in light of comments received through the consultation process. And I think a summary of the consultation analysis will be on our website. The intention is to publish the final funding model over the next few months, certainly before the end of the year. Alongside this, the Department will be developing and disseminating an operational guidance note both to our commissioners, but the guidance will also be issued to all relevant voluntary community sector bodies, along with further advice, for example, frequently asked questions, just to help them understand how they would link into the process and what's required of them. The new model will go live in April 2017, and as I noted earlier, it will be rolled out over a 3-year process, so it will be a gradual, progressive rollout of the system. I think that pretty well covers all I wanted to say at this point. I'm very happy to answer any questions or to elaborate on any aspect of my initial presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian, for a very concise presentation. Thank you. We're always stuck for time, very straight for time. I'd like to straight any questions. Obviously, there's a lot of material here in our packs as to how you've got to this position, and we understand the rationale, the logic with regards to the output and the outcomes process as opposed to what we've been used to for so many years, I suppose. But do we have a real analysis in the department of what each one of these bodies, each funding bodies, actually achieve within the department and the sphere of the department? Do we have a good grasp of knowledge and understanding of what they actually do?
The department has annual and indeed more frequent accountability meetings with all the major funded bodies. Therefore, we clearly do understand what they actually deliver. I think the concern, and one of the reasons for developing the new model, was that practice has varied across the department. And actually the practice, in line with previous approaches, has tended to focus on actually measuring processes. Like, for example, we all know they put 100 people through a course to make them more capable of, for example, ex-offenders going through a course to help them to get work. But what we don't get is how effective was that course in helping them to get work. So if you like, what we're saying in the model, we're trying to move away from the ones where we count widgets or count actually process towards saying, well, okay, if this process is to deliver something, how effective has it been in actually bringing about change? That's very consistent with the programme for government, which is obviously focusing now on saying, well, how are we changing people's lives? What outcomes are we delivering from our services? And that sort of outcome information is available to some degree, but it's not consistently available. So I think part of the model and part of our new way of thinking is moving us towards an approach where we increasingly focus on what differences the money is making rather than the fact the money is being spent. Sometimes
it's hard to measure the worth of an organisation by the work they do, but we would know, all of us would know about it if that wasn't in existence and the work wasn't being done. How do you ever input that into the psyche of this new funding body?
I think this isn't going to happen overnight. I think, but at the same time, having the objective that we actually start saying, well, what's the difference you're actually making on people's lives? It's actually quite a useful test for a body. I think it's fair to say that my experience of the voluntary and community sector is people who work in that sector are very motivated and actually want to bring about change in people's lives. But sometimes when it comes to accountability, they measure what's easy to measure. And if in fact it's easy to measure the number of courses you've done or the number of hours of work you put in an area rather than the outcome, they give us that information. And the department, in fairness, probably said, well, that's fair enough, that shows that you're doing good things. But what we're saying now is, in fact, we want increasingly to focus not on the process, but rather actually how it's going to change. That does mean, certainly for the bigger organisations, looking much more creatively at how they measure. So perhaps that means they do some post-service surveys, or maybe it does mean they have to spend a little bit of money on measurement, or maybe it does mean they follow up people they've actually worked with. But at the same time, to be honest, if you're actually an organisation committed to improving the lot of your client group, if you don't follow up and find out how effective your service has been, how do you know it's actually working yourself? So, it's actually not just in the interest of the department in making sure that we're focusing our funding on our priorities, and we know it's making a difference. It's also a good thing for voluntary groups because they should really be looking for that information so they can improve their own services.
And I hear what you say, but in an ideal world with time and space and funding, you would like to have that because it justifies your cause, your being it.
Absolutely.
But do they have the capacity?
I think
because they could be really good at doing it, not really good at recording it or seeing it at the other end.
Well, I would probably suggest that if you're not very good at seeing at the other end, you're not very good at doing it either. Because if you haven't got a good understanding of the impact difference your service is making, it's very hard for you to tune that service to make it even better. But I think it's a fair point. I mean, where we are, clearly bodies do actually. The bodies do actually have to find some way of actually developing measures. I have to say we've spoken and worked very closely with both NICFA and CO3. Both of those organisations are obviously umbrella organisations for the voluntary sector. Both of them are very supportive of this sort of approach. Both of them have been developing models and process to help voluntary groups to actually move to the new times. In addition, the Department for Communities is also putting in funding through, what was the organisation they're supporting?
Improving Impact is the organisation that's been funded by the Department for Communities. They've been working over the last year to actually address that particular issue, as in how to develop measurement and demonstrate your impact as an organisation, and they're continuing to do that. They're also recruiting and have recruited 11 advocacy groups across the sector to also spread that learning and improve the performance of those organisations.
What if you could tell a good yarn? I'll be provocative, but what if you could tell a good yarn? What if you could soup up your outputs but not really do the process well? Who attests that? Who scrutinises that?
Well, the department's job, as it is now, is actually to scrutinise. We spend public funding. We have a responsibility to ensure that money is spent appropriately. And clearly, there's a range of mechanisms we can do that. Not usually it's through an accountability process, which we have annually. We're not looking for bodies just to say, well, we talked to the chap down the road and he said it was a wonderful service. I think we're going to look for something a little bit more robust than that. But clearly, the measures have to be proportionate. If you're giving a body a small amount of funding, it doesn't make sense for them to go out and spend £5,000 on surveys. But clearly, if you've got a body which is spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on a key service development, it's not unreasonable to say they should take reasonable steps to be able to show that it's making a difference to people's lives. You know, it will be an iterative process. It's going to take time to develop, but I think it's the right way to go. In the sense, just measuring processes. You know, you're saying about somebody talking a good talk. You can measure. An organisation can run lots of processes, and which have create no material improvements. So it is more than just actually measuring things. You've got to measure the right things, and you've got to be able to actually check the veracity of what's being given to you.
Can I add to that in the fact that it actually introduces the other concept of co-design, which has been built into the process. And the co-design has two strong effects to it. One is it informs the department's commissioners so they understand the environment in which they're working in. They also understand what's trying to be delivered, and they also can work with the organisations to identify what might be more meaningful measures. And that way allows the accountability review process to have greater strength.
Are we sure that this process, and indeed even the programme for government and the aspects of that fall under your responsibility and the lap of justice, are we sure that everything is aligned? Because you have some of these funding bodies or some of these bodies that do specific work, let's say high risk offenders. Are we sure that everything is covered that needs to be covered within both the process, the funding process, and the programme for government?
Well, the three indicators of the programme of government related to outcome 7, which is mainly what covers the Department of Justice, are reducing crime, which is including actually heading people away from criminal activity, improving the effectiveness of the justice system, and reducing reoffending. Over those three areas, I don't think there are any bodies I'm aware of that don't actually fit into one, or perhaps even in some cases 2 or 3 of those. So they are certainly within the body of that area. Then, of course, the whole programme for government is about a new way of thinking as well. It's about focusing much more on outcome. And in fairness, actually, we have done this to degrees in the past, but just not consistently across the department. And I think the aim of the model is to try to get best practice and make sure best practice is deployed right across the department.
Okay. Obviously, there's some big players in this spectrum, some small players you've already alluded to. What are the views of NIACRO and Extern on the proposed funding model?
Well, I'm sure NIACRO and Extern will both have spoken to you separately. They are two quite different bodies. One of them actually, both of them have historically relied on core funding rather than actually the sort of cost.
Full cost recovery.
Full cost, cracking up, sorry, rather than full cost recovery. The reality is, in fact, the full cost recovery is a much more sensible approach from the point of view of government, because it does mean, in fact, we know what we're buying and what it contributes both to the cost of a programme, but also to the core costs, the central costs, which fall about and fall together. The two bodies I suspect may have different views, but they can talk for themselves. I certainly think that, in fact, one of the bodies actually has gone quite a long way down this sort of approach already, and certainly in my conversation they were quite welcoming of this approach. Well, they recognise, the challenges about measurement. The other one perhaps is perhaps slightly more of a traditional body, and I think it has some concerns. But the reality is, in fact, our aim, and I said at the beginning, this is not itself a fund-saving mechanism. It will be cost neutral. What we're trying to do is actually just trying to reposition the process about how you acquire money, and in the process, and in doing so, ensuring that what people provide to us is in line with our departmental objectives. And when we actually do fund something, we know what to expect in terms of actually an outcome.
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by cost neutral?
By cost neutral, I mean it's a process. We are not saying anybody should get more. We're not. This model won't increase or reduce the amount of total money going to the fund to the voluntary organisations. So
the bundle of money won't change just because
no, not from this model. Now, other parts of the department will make decisions about whether they can put money in or take money out of the voluntary and community sector. You might say on one line, if in fact outcome-based accountability works well and you can show that bodies are delivering a better outcome in terms of per pound spent in time, that may well make you wonder whether you shouldn't put more money into some sectors where in fact ultimately, if we're saying our focus must be on outcome, if some systems, say a voluntary body produces a particularly effective service, which is doing better than a comparable service in the statutory sector, you might well say, well, maybe we should be skewing some more expenditure that way. But the model itself doesn't actually make any decisions about money. It's just saying, let's have a robust process. So what we put money against our priorities, and where we put money in, we actually have some outcome measures which can actually assure the department that the money's being appropriately spent and delivering a real return in terms of improving people's lives.
So if it's cost neutral and with a different process on the funding allocations, will the process of funding allocation cost more?
The funding, let's say it should be cost neutral. It's not actually making a decision about more or less money to be put in overall. The process itself shouldn't be, we don't think it should be overall significantly more expensive. I'm not saying there wouldn't be some upfront costs. For example, I think the voluntary and community sector will need some support in helping them to develop into the new model. Now, I know NICFA and CO3 are already doing that, but the department may well have to look to see whether it needs to give some assistance in that area. I'm also confident that the department will actually have to get its act together. That means some training of staff to make sure, in fact, if we're moving towards a new model, not just the voluntary and community sector need to understand it, but so do the people who allocate the money. So there may be some small training upfront costs, but the model itself won't change the amount of money which is available. The amount of money going to the voluntary sector and the community sector will depend on other decisions of allocation and overall budgetary decisions.
So you mentioned commissioners. You talked about not a significant amount more money to do the process and the capacity building. Where does that money come from?
Well, ultimately, it'll come from the department, from our budget.
But it won't come out of the frontline funding?
Well, this is part of frontline funding. The reality is, in fact, the voluntary sector actually plays an important part. of the suite of services we deliver in the front line. Ultimately, what this is doing is helping the voluntary and community sector to perhaps over a 3-year period, to perhaps realign slightly. Because ultimately, in fact, as I said before, and we're not saying all the voluntary sector bodies are doing the wrong things. But what we're saying is they do things, but whether they're actually what they're doing necessarily aligns best with our priorities is a question, and whether in fact ultimately they're actually focused on how well they're doing in terms of outcomes is another question. So the hope is and the expectation is in justice and actually across other departments who fund the voluntary sector is this approach should actually help facilitate the process actually being streamlined to a degree, but certainly much more focused in terms of priorities.
Which two respondents didn't agree with the funding approach?
Can you?
One was from Unison, which I suppose basically suggested this was cutting of funding in some guise, and that was the main party that said no to this. There was also a response from a collective women's side, which they didn't actually address the issues. They talked about just trying to promote the skewing of resource to meeting the specific needs of women within the justice system and wider.
Okay, I'll put it out, Pam.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Could you tell us a bit more about what measures you're considering to minimise or mitigate against any disadvantage to smaller organisations?
So it's a disadvantage to small organisations.
Yes.
But we're actually recognising the aim of this wasn't to redistribute money per se, but rather actually to create more of a level playing field. The expectation is probably, if anything, that would be an advantage to some of the smaller bodies. Because at the moment, actually, because a number of the big bodies have received core funding, which tends to be locked in and actually doesn't actually change year on year, it does mean actually that, in fact, if you like, the budget's used up on some of our 20% of the bodies, and the amount of money available for some of the smaller bodies is actually going to be quite limited. So to some degree, our expectation is we move towards an outcome-based approach. If you've got a new small body that has a good idea and actually looks like it's going to make a significant difference, that would probably put them in a better place than is the case historically, where a lot of the money is locked straight into core funding for some of the bigger bodies. Now, ultimately, that may mean over time there's some movement around. But that's not necessarily unwelcome, because if the outcome of that is actually, say, a new body comes along with a very good evidence-based idea, which actually has been shown elsewhere to actually improve the outcomes of, say, resettlement. If that actually at the moment, it's often the case that because a lot of the money is already tied up, there's actually no room to actually fund that. So in the future, hopefully, there will be a little more opportunity for that sort of body to actually get funding. It's certainly the focus of the exercise is not on trying to centralise funding on a few bodies. I think the focus is actually trying to look at outcomes rather than actually put money into into traditional sort of locations without reference to the products they're producing.
And just in relation to the outcome-based accountability, two of the respondents didn't support the use of OBA. On what grounds was that?
Did they actually say what grounds are available?
I don't have the actual information directly in front of me now.
Will you come back to us with that?
I can look at that.
We can certainly give you some more information on that.
Okay, thank you.
And the summary of the consultation will be on our website as well, so if you want to look at that too.
Okay. Could you tell us a bit more about the procurement contracts and minimum requirements? So, can you tell us how you'll ensure that any procurement contracts don't just deliver minimum requirements but provide room for flexibility where necessary?
Well, I'll start this off and I'll pass over to my colleague. What we have said quite clearly in the consultation paper was that we're not suggesting that the answer to everything is procurement. what we've said, the answer is commissioning. Commissioning will be very much a mixed economy approach. There'll be some services which are very suitable for procurement, and in which case that makes the appropriate route. And certainly the government guidelines about procurement, which have been refreshed recently, would cover those for this department as it would for others when it comes to voluntary bodies. But our working assumption is, in fact, the procurement itself is not suitable, particularly for some of the smaller bodies, but some others as well, depending on the nature of the service being provided. So we've not come out and said you must procure in all circumstances. We've said procurement is one of a number of commissioning routes. There'll be grants and aids. We did actually also, you'll notice, talked about in an innovation fund. That's one we're still working to work out how to develop and work out what proportion of money would go into that. But the process of an innovation fund might pick up some very new bodies that haven't really got a base. They've got an evidence base for what they're proposing to do. They want to do it, but they really need to be given, if you like, a seeding grant to get them started, after which they would probably just go on to full cost recovery in a normal manner. So we are trying to create a model where we're not just locking everything into what's always... We're trying to go away from a model where people get funded for what they've always got funded for, towards one much more amenable to actually funding on the basis of outcome. And in that will offer some opportunities for new bodies. Anyway, I wanted to go on to... Gary, you might want to pick up on the other part of that question.
I was just going to actually expand on the commissioning approach as well, from the point of view that it's a much broader approach to securing services, and part of what we tried to highlight within our model was the fact that the aspects of co-design and involving and engaging the sector itself at a very early stage allows us, one, to inform what would be a brief to secure a given resource or a given service, etc. And in that, that itself would turn out and say this is perhaps more attuned to a grant proposal as opposed to a contract proposal, so it allows those at an early stage to understand and engage in that process.
Also actually to inform the process as well.
Absolutely.
Because we're not pretending we necessarily have the best information on every voluntary sector body. It may well be bringing groups into a co-design, may bring in new ideas which hadn't been considered, which might give you an opportunity to develop the service perhaps quite differently.
In addition to that, we've actually gone to our colleagues within the Department of Finance and Central Procurement to draw out the qualities that one would expect to ensure that the process that we would operate would be open, transparent, and equality of opportunities provided within that whole process. So we avoid direct or indirect discrimination in any way there to ensure that we open up and give opportunity for the sector to be involved within any service that we would look to secure in the future. So again, we've tried to draw on that, and so the merits of that approach would be engineered into the commissioning process, so that it does keep it fair and equitable, even in the form of competition.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Claire?
Thank you. Just at the start of your presentation there, Brian, you mentioned that there were about 90 funded bodies through this, and just a quick question to see if there was a list of, to have a look at who they might be.
Will the list be in?
I don't have them on me, but I can certainly provide you a list.
Or is it available anywhere?
The numbers will vary
in
each year, but that's on average. We will have about 90 organisations funded. There's a number of fluctuations there,
yeah,
and hence we've presented it there so that you can appreciate that how we've said, 80% of our funds actually go through 20% of those organisations, which illustrates the fact that there are a large number of smaller funding packages that go through us.
Yeah, but I'm just conscious that I'm quite new to this. So it's just for me to get up to speed. I can go onto your website, for example, and just sort of see who your partners
it's
are.
not on the website.
It won't be on the website that I know of, but I'll certainly send it through to you.
Brilliant, thank you. And again, for my own self, I keep hearing this word about the co-design approach. I'm just wondering if you could explain to me how that works.
Well,
what is the difference there?
The idea behind co-design is actually involving those who are going to be involved, both frontline, learning from those whom we're trying to deliver the services to, so we can get stakeholders on the ground involved, all the better, but in particularly the delivery agents that might do this, because it'll do several things. One, it helps the department learn about the services that we think we need. We need to understand the barriers and problems in trying to secure the outcomes that we wish. And therefore that knowledge and understanding that the voluntary sector have at this moment in time is what we're trying to engage, so that we can actually then identify the right service to secure that will have the impacts that we want on the recipients of that. So the co-design can happen at several phases, and it has been used. I mean, the likes of NIACROs would work very closely with the department in trying to design provisions for those addressing reoffending issues. So it's actually trying to engineer that, and we want to engineer that into informing how and what services we need in line with our priorities. In addition to that, then making sure that the commissioning process accurately portrays that, and it'll be done throughout the process, because it'll be a case of actually trying to use the information both from those who are potential providers of service, including people in the community itself. We can harness those, and from the department's perspective, from a policy perspective, to get the balance right.
Just very briefly, it could range from everything from where you actually have an area where you're concerned there's an area where there's a deficit in one area, there's perhaps lack of services, and there's a need to actually improve outcomes. You may well bring together a number of the bodies in the area working in that field. Just say, here's a need, we are minded to actually sort of develop in this area. We're interested for your ideas about actually how best that might work, how actually it might fit into the evidence available in terms of good practice. And from that, they would help you to draw up a spec. That would then be put out, and then it might well be, you may well even get preferred bidders, maybe 2 or 3. If it's a big contract, you might get 2 or 3, or big procurement, you might get some preferred bidders. You have a further round of discussions with, and then you produce a final spec which then goes out. Now clearly we wanting this proportionate. If it's a small amount of money, I'm not going to do a massive exercise. But I think the basis is, as Gary says, it's something we've used in the past, and perhaps a lesser level, where in the past, I've sat with voluntary bodies and actually said, here's an area of need. And we've talked about, what the evidence was, how you might have done this. And then from that, we'd have probably done that on a bilateral basis. Now, that ultimately kept you locked into the bodies you always use, and that reinforced your traditional funding model. But what we're saying is, in fact, co-design should give more people the opportunity to come around the table at an early stage. And from that, actually, it means, A, we get some assurance that what we're actually developing is the best possible solution. But also it means, in fact, we've got some much more of a partnership approach between the department and the sector to make sure that we're delivering the right things. So, it's an area which certainly works in places in Northern Ireland at the moment. Certainly CO3 and NICFA are both very keen on the process, and I think they're working with some of their members just to help them actually sort of, if you like, gear up for this sort of approach in the future.
I mean, just when you mentioned also that there was the responses to the consultation, Unison, who thought or were convinced it was a money-saving exercise, and then various bodies from the women's sector. Did you say did they come in as one single consultation response?
It was they came across. I think there was maybe 5 or 6 in a network response to me. Okay.
Has anything been done? Any attempts have been made to follow up or engage with them to try and reassure them of the process, and that
we're not at that stage yet. Well, we only just got through the consultation, but we're clearly seeing as part of the rollout. I think we are very happy to engage, and indeed during the consultation process, I did say in fact we were very happy at any point to have one-to-one meetings with individual organisations or groups of organisations. A few took that up, and those were quite productive, because I'm very conscious this is it's not a complex area. If you're a small voluntary organisation dealing with limited services in an obscure part of the department, when you're seeing this big funding model, it may well actually be quite alien to you, and you may well actually just find it actually difficult to understand. That's why we had the public consultation.
Cuts that are coming down to them as well, so it's...
Yeah, well, we're still very open, indeed, very happy to talk to any of the bodies, and indeed, I suspect, as this rolls out, that will have to be part of the process as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Roy?
Again, thank you for the presentation. I'm just going to go through this process a little bit more. The full cost recovery, which essentially you're saying is the removal of the core funding and then being able to distribute it through other means. Would that be right?
Well, it is and it isn't. The full cost recovery.
Can you clarify that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. No, essentially, at the moment, for example, some of the bigger organisations might well actually be. They may be running 10 or 11 or 12, a number of different projects. We've historically funded them, say, we've given them X thousand, perhaps hundreds of thousands of pounds, for which they deliver those projects. If they decide they wanted to bid for an additional project, and this was, if you like, an opportunity where others were bidding as well, because they're core funded, all their central costs are already covered. So, in essence, in fact, the marginal cost of providing the extra service to them will be less than actually a full cost recovery model, because essentially all the core costs have been funded up front. And if they're actually competing with others who aren't core funded, who obviously put all their costs, full cost recovery costs against the project, then in fact you create an uneven environment. Okay. So in essence, in fact, with full cost recovery, we're not saying you take the money away from none of the bodies who've got core funding. What we're saying, that money will be, if you like, relabelled as, if they're running 10 projects, those 10 projects should support all the central costs, which would be apportioned against each of those projects. So if they brought another project on stream, they would put full cost recovery costs against it. It's a bit technical, but as it stands, what's happened is, in fact, we've created an uneven playing field. So some of the newer or smaller bodies find it very difficult to get funding because they're competing with others who have already got core funding.
What amount is currently involved in this core funding element that you're talking about? What amount of money is presently allocated to core funding in some of the bigger organisations that you've illustrated there?
Well, some of the bigger organisations prove all the funding through core funding.
Right, okay. Interesting.
I think that's right, isn't it, Gary?
Have you a figure you think that will have to be eased up and bid for then that previously was automatically distributed?
Part of the thing about core funding is, in fact, it's given you great stability in the system, because if a body's getting money year on year, then in fact they're able to plan ahead. But the price of the stability is, in fact, new entrants find it very hard to get in, because at a time when money is static or diminishing, ultimately what happens is, in fact, the funding sticks where it's always been.
Okay. Do you accept that there could be a double-edged sword here? Yes, in theory, more money will be freed up for bidding, but there could also be a danger if there may be fewer organisations around to bid, if other bodies don't have the core funding to put the application in the first place.
Maybe I'll try at this point. The idea of bringing in the full cost recovery is in order that we can identify the actual costs, that of delivering a programme, for argument's sake, and the overheads that go along with that. If you've got an organisation that has multiple programmes in place, the idea is that there's an apportionment of the overheads and the direct costs, which would give you a sum of money in comparison to another organisation, which perhaps is a one-off. So they're sitting saying, here's my programme, here's my overheads. It allows a more direct comparison. It's not actually about removing funds at this stage of the game. It's not about taking the money off. It's about apportioning it in a way that we can label it and understand, so we can make direct comparisons, which gives a more equitable opportunity for people to compete for that resource.
Okay.
But I think I would also say, though, you could find in a big organisation, it could be one project actually doesn't produce good outcomes. And actually, I think it's in our interest that, where money is finite, there's £5 million to go across all the justice bodies. If in fact the body's got one of the bigger bodies has one of its projects which is delivering against our priorities, then we would like to see. Now, in that model, the first thing you try to do is find out what's happened. It may be a good reason. It may well be you would look to them to see how they can modify or improve the system so it started to deliver. But at the same time, clearly, if that persisted, then in fact you would want that money to move from that project to one which was delivering an outcome. So we're not trying to keep the system exactly as it is at the moment. Yeah. At the same time, we're not trying to create a revolutionary change.
Okay. In terms of moving to outcomes-based funding, the ultimate model that I've come across in the world of employment assistance is that you don't get anything until someone's in a full year of employment, but that
The payment by results is not where we are.
I was seeking reassurance that we...
No, that's not...
Because my particular concern with that is it seemed to mean that multinational comes in who'd only had the cash flow to be able to fund issues like that,
Yeah.
and your voluntary putties on the ground can end up simply being subcontractors squeezed.
Well, I think we are very mindful of that, and that's certainly a model we've seen in England. I have to say, I actually have seen payment by results in a very small scale work in New York, but at the same time, by and large, the English models actually we've been unconvinced by, whereas I'm sure there's good work there. My sense is a number of those projects have never been properly piloted, and we haven't been convinced by them. So that hasn't been our approach. But at the same time, we do see it makes good sense to have the money we put in linked to what we expect by way of actual product in terms of outcome.
I'm just urgent caution as move forward.
Well, there's nothing in this document, or indeed in our current thinking, that suggests we want to move towards that sort of model.
Thank you.
Okay, Alex Howard.
Thank you, and thank you, Brian, for as always is your nature, straightforward answers to questions. So you mentioned that the budget line was 5 million. What was the budget line? I think you did mention that, but what was the budget line in the previous financial year? What is the budget line this year?
I haven't got the precise...
And what is your proposal for the budget line around this work for next year?
I haven't got the precise figures year on year. What I can say is, in fact, you'll recall that, and of course, we go back to last year, we were in the previous administration. And the previous administration, I think, whereas that year before, the department actually, its budget reduced by 5.7%, the grants to voluntary, the budget covering the voluntary sector reduced by 1.5%. So we had substantially protected it. Now, ultimately, the then minister was unable to fully protect it, but it was substantially better off than the core department. On the budget going forward, this committee will be talking to our Director of Finance about actually our budget approach in due course. No doubt she will flag just where we are at the moment. I think it doesn't need me to tell you that times are hard and the department's having to make hard decisions. But this model isn't about actually, as I said, isn't about the allocations of funding. So I haven't got any proposal out of this model which is going to change things. This will be a quite separate issue about the overall funding available to the department and how it might be allocated.
Can you answer the question then, not in terms of what the budget line might be, but to anticipate that the protection afforded to this stream of work, the intention is for the same protection in 17-18?
I can't. We have a new minister who is looking at all her priorities. I am not at this stage able to. I've not spoken to her about this, so I can't say. I know Claire Sugden has been very clear that she values and respects the contribution of the voluntary community sector and wants to actually, she said to me, wants to do what we can to protect it. But as to how that translates into budget allocation, I'm unable to comment.
I don't want to get ahead of the next briefing, but has there been any thinking or any proposals in respect of accessing fresh start monies in relation to the work of the
I think you've got ahead of yourself on this one, Alex. I can't comment, and certainly I'm here to talk to you about an allocative model, not about allocations of funding. Fresh Start is a discrete area, and actually the funding is there for a particular set of purposes, which no doubt you'll discuss at length when I get up and leave.
Ultimately, though, you've got 80% of the money going to 20% of the groups. And whilst you're right to focus on an outcomes-based project, my own view is that the voluntary community sector, they're very much about outcomes already, because they're very much at the core base. They're dealing with people who are in the justice system, coming out of the prison system, whatever it might be. So they're actually dealing with real lives, real people, and therefore, by the nature, deal with real outcomes. So I'm trying to work out, if that is the character of the community and voluntary sector, what added value is there in terms of this approach? I can understand the added value in terms of partnership working It seems to me what might be driving this all, that it's about partnership, that if they partner up, they might get even more value when it comes to outcomes, and there might be more efficient use of monies rather than replication. Is that really what is the heart of this?
Well, I would. It's not the. There are a number of things at the heart of it, but I think that's perhaps not a bad summary. Clearly, like you, I spent my whole career dealing with the voluntary community sector, and I have a great deal of respect for it. But that being said, I'm also, because I worked with it for much of my career, I also know it's not always as good as it's cracked up to be. There are outstanding parts of the voluntary community sector, and some bits who actually perhaps from time to time lose energy and that need to be revived. The aim of this sort of model, looking at outcome, is actually to remind the bodies. I don't think it's going to be a revolutionary change for many of the bodies, but even speaking to NICFA, they were noting, that they find that there's been quite a range of responses of their members. Some, and I think probably Extern would be a good example. I'd expect Extern to grab this because the way Extern works actually would fit very well with this. They probably prefer to keep a core grant as well, but reality was it's quite in keeping with their business model. There'll be other bodies which are very traditional in their approach and actually will find it a bit of a challenge. So, I think it is going to have some differential impact depending on just how good or just how up to date the voluntary body is. But the reality is it does create opportunities. It might create opportunities for some bodies to work together. And that's probably not in that's in everyone's interest. But sometimes in the voluntary sector, you do tend to find it tends to actually sort of bud. You start with one body and then there's two and then there's four. Sometimes getting bodies working in related but quite closely related areas, sometimes getting bodies to work more creatively, where one body will have an expertise in one area and another in another. Brought together, those two bodies could perhaps produce an outcome which wasn't deliverable by either of them. So, so in the back of this, we can see some potential benefits from that sort of approach. But the reality is, in fact, the department is actually committed to the programme for government-based approach, the outcome-based approach. This is very much linked to that. I think some bodies are actually already focused on outcomes, but not all. This will actually help streamline that, and it will allow us to actually very much increasingly as a department focus on our priorities and make sure that what we're buying from our grants and our funding is delivering actually the best outcomes to people.
And I'd agree with that, but at the end of the day, I do think it is probably more about trying to create collaboration and partnership, and those who are not more outcomes focused become more outcomes focused. Although you're dealing with a sector that I think is very already vigilant around all of that. My own comment though is that I would not see any great upset in the balance of the resources that are going to the larger and to the smaller, because the nature of these reviews, and you can see them being done in other departments, is that it degrades the small and benefits the large, and I'm cautious about, so when it comes to the final distribution of monies, and whilst there might be more partnership workings, my own view is we need to try to keep that threshold of 20% going to 80% of the groups.
I wouldn't disagree with anything you've said. I think the partnership thing is absolutely critical. I think certainly our aim isn't, we haven't got a magic proportion of big and small groups. I think in times those numbers do change a little bit. And probably at the moment, because of the funding model, the system has rarefied to a degree because the current structure sort of keeps everybody where they are. So I would like to see a bit more movement in both directions. It may well be the balance is always going to be an 80-20, which sounds like a sort of Pareto sort of number. It may be that sort of balance is always going to be there, but at the same time, it shouldn't always be the same people in that 20% probably over time. So, to me, actually, what it's doing is it's trying to create an open, more transparent system. I think I'm sure there'll be winners and losers, but overall, what we should be seeing is actually bodies who want to do good things being encouraged to do the right good things and demonstrate what they're doing. And I think that doesn't do us any harm. And certainly in terms of public accountability, I'm much happier when I know we're putting £5 million of public money into the voluntary sector, and we know what we're getting by way of improved outcomes of people. That's a better measure than saying, well, okay, we're producing X thousand individual procedures. And when you ask, well, what do the procedures to deliver, we can't say.
Thank you.
Just on Alex's point about the Fresh Start funding, I know that you sort of didn't want to answer that question, but surely yourselves, Deputy Director and then Head of a Legacy Unit, surely you are the people to say, well look, we need to grab some of this funding and at least highlight to the voluntary sector that here's funding available. Has that been done?
Well, the funding for Fresh Start has been available for a very specific purpose by the government, and it's obviously been allocated on the basis it's been delivered. I'm here today with an allocation model which doesn't really make any decisions about allocations. I'm not saying that there aren't actually elements in the voluntary sector doing things which could be supportive of work with paramilitaries or former paramilitaries, and as such that may well attract money. But I'm just saying that's not although I do seem to have an interesting mix of work under my belt, that area isn't one of the ones I'm directly responsible for. So in fact, and neither am I responsible for that money. So in fact, since I don't own the turf and I don't own the money, I think it's probably better you wait till the actual leader behind me comes.
Just why I ask it, because you can see there are many organisations, Housing Executive, Attorney General, they're all bidding for money in that regard. So surely some of the work that's done by the community and voluntary sector could probably do it better than government agencies.
They may well do, but I'm just saying the people in the department who bid for that would be actually the director of secondary, the director of safer communities, and possibly the director of access to justice. Right. It's not actually me. So in fact, so I wouldn't want to venture an answer, but just in case I don't add any sort of sum total of human knowledge. I
understand. Now, to go back to Claire's point about code design, because the more I listen, the more I get nervous. Co-design, now my simpleton mind looked at me as if you were asking to work in partnership with the voluntary groups that actually produce the service to redesign the service. Now if that's the case, is there not surely a conflict of interest along the road when you go to procurement?
Well, when you go to procurement, and we're acutely conscious of the procurement rules, if we were going to procure a new service in an area, we would actually, I think, and you were going for co-design, what you would do is you would invite all the bodies who would have a potential interest in the area to a pre-procurement sort of meeting, where you just say, here's our need. Our need is, in fact, to actually have fewer people coming out of prison being unemployed in the 20 to 65 age band. Here's our need. We want to we're looking to develop new services which will actively meet this. What's the best way of doing it? And if from those bodies, some might say, well, actually we have this particular approach. Some will say, well, actually in America they understand there's a model here which has had this thing. What it does is it brings together all the people who have an interest in the area. And because you're not restricting it, as we have in the past probably, where I would probably talk to maybe one organisation or two, you have all those in the room, so it's all very open and above board. They can talk about those. The people who come around the room get a better understanding of the department's thinking. The department gets a better understanding of some of the different options available, and from that it helps it to develop a specification. And that's actually the basis of co-design. Then downstream, when you're actually going towards the preferred bidder, you also have conversations about, well, if this is where we're going, what's the best way of getting there? It's the same, not dissimilar in the procurement service, what I've done when we built Woodlands. Yeah. Or when we built the forensic pathology laboratories, where we had just that sort of approach with in that case, builders, but at the same time, you brought all them in the room at the beginning, and when you got to preferred bidder stage, you brought preferred bidders in to see what their solutions might be.
There's only one way to build a building.
Sorry?
There's only one way to build a building.
If you ever try building a public building, you'll find there are lots of ways. And a complex building like a forensic laboratory or a juvenile justice centre, there are actually quite a few different models to work. So in fact,
well, at design stage, but if you're talking about building,
well, the design stage, right? Ultimately, you build what you design, and the design stage is critical. Just as in a voluntary sector, a service delivering outcomes, the design stage is critical. If you don't design the right thing, you won't actually build the right service.
But it's different because all the architects will be able to design whatever you wish, and all the builders will be able to build whatever you wish. But if you're sitting around a table and they have a debate as to what you want delivered, and they can input into that, and somebody wins out in that debate, somebody's idea takes hold, surely that person's idea, surely that person has got an advantage.
Well, if in fact we'd only had the conversation with them, then you're right. If you had, say there were 3 players, and if all the 3 each of them threw in ideas, maybe it'd be a synthesis of ideas that came out. Perhaps one of the key ideas came from one of the players. But that helps you draw up the specification. When you go out, that specification is your best assessment of what would deliver the outcome you want. When that goes in, all 3 of those, who will have also heard what each other have said, and they'll see the specification. If one of them didn't have that idea, but they say, well, okay, that's what you want, I can do it this way, and I can bring in these resources and this expertise. It doesn't follow the person who had the idea is necessarily the person best able to deliver it. So that's actually how it works that's how it works in business. And in some ways, we're not trying to produce a hard business model. This is actually very much a partnership approach. And we do use this to degrees at the moment. And certainly, in fact, this is a model which we're seeing that it's going to be increasingly prevalent across government.
When you get a design model and you decide, right, we're going to fund this, how long will that period be?
Sorry?
How long will the period of funding be?
Well, that will be up to the people that allocate the system. What we're saying in our model is our expectation is, in fact, if we're going to have a consistent model, we need to give people a reasonable funding period, which is probably 3 to 5 years. Because ultimately, funding things year on year doesn't make a lot of sense. Because if you're employing staff, your staff are actually on notice every year, and essentially you find good staff move on because they haven't got any security. Now, in the nature of these sort of body things, you're not going to say we're going to fund you for the next 20 years, but certainly a 3 or 5 year period would make good sense. But of course, during that period, you will look at the outcomes each at a regular basis. And if, when you look at them, the outcomes aren't being delivered, then you'll have questions about, well, what's happening? It could be that some good reason for it, in which case, fair enough, that happens. Equally, you could find maybe that the system's not working as advertised, in which case you expect that body to fix that. If, another year, 6 months or a year on, it's still going that way, then actually I think you have a hard question as to whether you pull the plug. But that's on the basis, in fact, our job is to use public money for good outcomes. If, in fact, we're expending public money and actually the outcome is not being delivered, and, in fact, it's not reparable and there's no good reason for it, then, in fact, it makes more sense sometimes to cut your losses and put the money to another body who will be able to do better.
How much of that 5 million is tied up in joint partnership funding with, say, Department of Health or Department of Education, and then how will that work?
At the moment, I think I would hazard a guess at probably almost none. Now, the department did put a substantial money in the last administration into early years funding, and that wasn't quite joint funding because the nature of early years is actually quite a bit out before people come to the justice system. And the reason that the department put the money and the Minister of the day put the money there was because, as part of our overall reducing funding framework, we saw, in fact, really putting money upstream will benefit the justice system downstream, and it was part of a cross-departmental. It was part of the delivering I forget what the scheme was now. What was it called? Anyway, it was the OFM DFM scheme at the time, which was a cross-governmental scheme, delivering social change. Thank you. Yeah. That actually we did put money into directly. But what I would say is that as part of the programme for government, I'm speaking directly to Department of Communities, Department of Health, Department of Education, as are some of my colleagues, about in bringing forward programme for government generally, how we work more effectively together. And certainly that we'll see coming out of that some of the work on problem-solving justice, which this committee actually was certainly very involved in actually in the last administration. On the programme on the problem-solving justice, we are looking at the moment about setting up a substance abuse court. We're looking at actually a number of schemes which will work with health and with education and with communities. So we're seeing that sort of work developing as the programme for government moves forward. And I have to say there's an encouraging increase in multi-way communication between departments in these areas. And I think that's very much in the interest of good government.
There may be slack or room in round Ballymena for that project, by the way, just putting that out.
Yeah, people keep telling me that. I can't imagine why.
Okay, well listen, thank you very much. One other question I have is that when I was reading the pack here, information was scant about the actual detail of the respondents. Now I know you addressed that with Pam's question and you were going to put it on the website.
Yeah.
When we have that as a committee, that's very important that we would have that to look and really delve into some of the understanding around it.
No, absolutely, that's not a problem.
Okay. Any other questions, members? Okay. Thanks very much then for your presentation. Can I seek the agreement of members to write to the Department of Justice and indicate that the committee wishes to have an opportunity to consider and submit views on the final proposed funding model, any measures proposed to mitigate or minimise potential disadvantages to smaller voluntary community and social enterprise organisations, and any findings from revisiting the equality considerations? Are any other members want to input into anything else? Are we content?
Chair, I think, were you asking for a list of consultation respondents?
Yes, sorry, that was a question you asked too.
It's on the... It's in the pack though, is it not?
Yeah, it's the pack of respondents, but there's no detail of what they actually said.
Oh yeah. I would be keen to see, the consultation responses in relation to what you're talking about there.
I don't necessarily want to see all the consultation responses because it would be all of them, but the department surely will do a report on the responses. Would we be interested also to hear, and again I'm putting this out here, would we be interested to hear from the Agro and Extern about their feelings on it? I don't want to say concerns, just in case, I don't want to, but their feelings on it at this stage. Are members content?
Yeah.
Maybe in the interim before we get the full final picture.
Keen to hear also from Women's Aid if they had strong objections, particularly because they're a smaller player in it, who are being squeezed in the funding model too, and just hear what their concerns are in relation to the women's sector.
Okay, do you want to write? I wonder, was it Women's Aid? Was it?
They're listed as a respondent here, and was it Brian, I think? Sorry, the other one who was saying that it was a network.
Yes. Well, I wonder, do we write to them directly, or do we ask for their response?
Chair, would not be easier just to actually ask for the... I know it will be a whole lot there, but if you can have electronically, then anybody's interested can see individual responses amongst it.
Ask for all day.
As well as their report, I suppose.
As well as the report.
Yeah, okay.
Because they are electronic, aren't they? So you just go online and see them.
Okay, we'll certainly ask for that. Okay, so then members, are we content then in the meantime to note the results of the consultation? Obviously we're going to ask for that information and the more detail around the responses and then the specific as we asked. Members content? Okay then, members. Agenda number 8, item number 5. Tackling paramilitary activity, criminality and organised crime, implementation of the Executive Action Plan. Can I remind members that at the meeting on the 15th September, the committee considered the Executive Action Plan tackling paramilitary activity, criminality and organised crime, which sets out how the recommendations in the report of the independent 3-person panel will be taken forward and implemented. The committee agreed on an oral evidence session that should be scheduled with department officials on the action plan. The committee also considered a response from the Minister of Justice regarding arrangements for funding the National Crime Agency under the Fresh Start Agreement and agreed to schedule an oral briefing session with officials on the arrangements for managing bids for funding and related issues. I advise members that department officials will attend the meeting today and provide oral evidence and answer members' questions on both areas. Can I inform members that the first oral evidence session will focus on the Executive Action Plan, The relevant papers are at pages 68 to 200 of the meeting pack. And I advise members then that while there's likely to be some crossover between the two sessions, members should try and keep specific questions on the arrangements for managing bids for the funding under Fresh Start to the next evidence session. If we can cope with that, that would be okay. There will be crossover, but I'll make it go much more focused, I think, if we can hold our powder on that one. So can I welcome then Anthony Harbison, Director, Safer Communities Directorate, and Karen Pearson, Deputy Director, and Katie Taylor, Protection and Organised Crime Division, Department of Justice, to the meeting. You're all very welcome. Thank you very much. Can I advise you that this session and the next will be recorded by Hansard, and the transcripts will be published on the committee website. Thank you very much. Anthony, I think you're leading off. Is that?
Yes, that's correct. Just to touch on your last discussion, Chairman.
Okay.
The Department of Justice doesn't fund Women's Aid directly. We don't have any core funding with it. We actually fund the helpline and go through that. So there's no direct funding. It tends to come from Department of Health, so it does.
Very useful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, without further ado, Anthony, thank you.
Well, thank you again. I'm grateful for the opportunity to brief the committee today on the work to date to bring forward the commitments made in Fresh Start to tackling paramilitary activity, criminality and organised crime. As you mentioned, I'm joined today by Karen Pearson, our Deputy Director of Protection and Organised Crime Division, and Katie Taylor, Head of the Fresh Start Implementation Branch. So hopefully between the three of us we'll answer most of your questions, but anything that we can't answer today we'll of course provide to you. Members will be aware that the Executive published its action plan on tackling paramilitary activity on the 19th of July. Set out our initial response to the three-person panel report on disbanding paramilitary groups and sought to draw together the recommendations made by the three-person panel and also the commitments made in Fresh Start. The response set out in the action plan demonstrated the Executive's intention to develop a strategic approach to this programme of work, recognising the context of the outcomes-based approach as highlighted in the new programme for government, and the work already underway as a result of the Fresh Start agreement. For that reason, we have utilised in the action plan the four themes set out in the three-person panel report. That is, promoting lawfulness, supporting transition, tackling criminal activity, and addressing systemic issues. You will be aware that the DOJ is leading on the coordination of this work. However, Fresh Start cuts across the Executive and is far wider than just the Department of Justice. The DOJ has a significant role to play, in particular in coordinating and ensuring the effective implementation of Section A of Fresh Start and the Executive Action Plan. Having said that, it is important to stress that this is very much an Executive Action Plan, and the Executive has made commitments to tackling this issue collectively and in an ambitious and collaborative manner. To that effect, a cross-departmental programme board has been established, which now includes representatives from all 9 executive departments. That board is responsible for overseeing and assisting the governance and implementation of this programme of work. Whilst departments and agencies remain responsible for the actions, outcomes and funding allocated to them, the board collectively monitors the progress in implementing the commitments made in both Section A of the Fresh Start and in the Executive Action Plan. The board is currently working to develop a costed programme of work to deliver against these. The other key role of the board is to consider the allocation of funding against commitments in the action plan and bids to support its delivery. Bids are tabled for the board's consideration and measured against a set criteria. Successful bids are subject to the usual departmental governance arrangements, including an approved business case within delegated limits, and are cleared through the monitoring round process. The action plan was a high-level strategic response to the three-person panel report, setting out the Executive's intention to progress a programme of work to tackle the issue. It has put forward a combination of approaches to address paramilitary activity and associated criminality, ranging from law enforcement to supporting communities in transition, alongside work to prevent vulnerable young people becoming involved in paramilitary activity. The key element of the action plan is that it recognises the excellent work already underway in communities to complete the transition away from paramilitarism. We recognise that it is vital that we design and deliver this action plan in partnership with voluntary and statutory bodies, as well as with local communities and citizens across Northern Ireland. In order to do this, we need to hear about and support local, ambitious and creative initiatives aimed at building confidence and capacity for citizens and communities. We began planning for that process during the design day at the end of September with relevant departments and statutory agencies. Arising from this day, there was a general consensus that some of the interventions required to ensure effective programme of work will require a focused impact on certain areas geographically and thematically. We're now working with colleagues across the executive to see how this can be taken forward. Most importantly, we want to ensure that we take the time to develop a cohesive and joined-up programme of work that takes account of the work already going into many communities and is not simply a series of projects taking place in a silo environment. I've already mentioned the bids and the funding allocations are considered by the programme board. To date, for 2016-17, the Executive has made available £5 million for the purposes of Fresh Start and meeting the action plan. We have allocated some £4 million of this funding already in support of Fresh Start and for the preparatory work for the action plan. This includes the development of a public awareness campaign on organised crime, funding for a dedicated investigative resource for the PSNI, some funding for the preparations for a programme to encourage and support the role of women in community development, which is again a commitment within Fresh Start. We've made a good start in funding commitments made in Fresh Start and in preparing for full implementation of the action plan. However, the funding must be spent meaningfully and in a way that is going to make a substantive and sustainable difference. We're very mindful of the public and political interest in the impact of this particular action plan, and we fully expect robust scrutiny of the measures we take. We have our own monitoring arrangements in place and we are considering commissioning an independent evaluation. We expect you, along with other Assembly committees, will also be interested in the progress that is being made. You will be aware that the UK and Irish governments recently signed a treaty establishing the Independent Reporting Commission. The IRC will have a statutory remit to oversee the progress and will report at least once a year. We will carefully consider its reports in reviewing our progress and actions. We will be seeking to develop a progress report that meets the needs of the many interested parties, and we will ensure this with the committee in due course. If I may, Mr Chairman, I'd like to move now to the other issue that the committee has expressed an interest in, how funding might work for non-devolved bodies, and I know you're going to take this afterwards, but I thought it's easier to have it in one single address.
Well, no, if you can, we'll try and keep it concise. If you don't mind, Anthony.
Well, that's fine.
I want to try and keep members focused.
Yes.
One on the action plan, and then on the arrangements itself, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine.
Because I'd be keen to. My memory's bad at the best of times, and I don't want to lose sight of something that I wish to ask.
Yes.
But and funny enough, my first question will be on funding, but it won't be on the arrangements of funding. There's a table there of bidders. I also see that it's broken down into 4 parts. Fresh Start. Have we any sort of idea of the allocation of money needed for each one of those 4 subheadings? And then also, with regards to the funding allocated by the Cross-Departmental Programme Board in 2016-17, we've got a list of bids, but we don't have any amounts beside them. I'm just wondering why that is the case.
We can supply that information.
Right, okay. And then with regards to the 4 main top headings,
in terms of the 4 main top headings, no, at this point we haven't decided what the allocation of the monies would be between those particular 4 areas. We're working in trying to develop the responses to the action plan. We're trying to develop those areas. We will be developing a commissioning model to take this forward. So there is a process of trying to get the money spent basically over the next 4.5 years. But no, we haven't at this point. It would be too soon in the process to actually have it 20% here, 30% there. We just don't have that at this point in time. What I would say is that law enforcement is one of the big issues, and there will be substantive bids we know coming in from people like the PSNI and others. But it will be for the cross-departmental programme board and eventually for the executive to decide whether or not those bids are met, either in part or in full.
You mentioned about the cross-departmental programme, and you say that all departments are represented on that. Whilst this is a scourge of society, you can understand why some departments would take leads and others won't. Others will be affected directly, others indirectly. What sort of level of representation do all departments have on the cross-departmental programme?
Basically, the membership is grade 5, grade 3 level going forward, so it's quite substantive representation. Actually, people are getting involved in this. We were quite keen to encourage every department to be part of this cross-departmental board, because whilst it may not look initially like it's something in their area, basically every department, I think, has a role in this, whether that be Department for the Economy, Department for Infrastructure, or Health or Justice.
With regards to the well, how often does the cross-departmental board meet?
We've met 5 times to date, so we have, the last one was, I think, the first week of September, and basically we're meeting on a sort of every 2 months basis at the moment, trying to get the programme set up, trying to take it forward, so fairly frequently at the moment.
Okay, and you talk about design days. You had one in September. Are they going to continue, or?
Well, the design day was to actually look at how we would begin to spend this money, look at what we were trying to do, but before we actually dealt with where we would spend the money, it was what are the issues that we need to consider, how do we need to take this forward, so how do we involve communities, how do we work with communities, what are the key areas that we would look at. So we've been working on that sort of a basis and trying to build that up. So there's a lot of work that's flowing from the design day, and we're developing work, and then that will be brought back to the cross-departmental board.
I'm aware the title is Tackling Paramilitary Activity, Criminality and Organised Crime. Through my time and experience growing up in the Troubles, you could see very clearly that there were some communities who were completely strangled by paramilitary activity. It could even have come down to numbers. Even design of estates played a part. And then you get other areas, village settings in the rural side, whereby the weight of number on the paramilitary side maybe wasn't as mighty, maybe not as influential, maybe characters weren't as pivotal. And the community groups worked tooth and nail, worked to the bone throughout the height of the Troubles to ensure that community did not find itself in the grip of paramilitarism. Now, you said something in your presentation that alarmed me, and you said that you thought that this may have to be impacted or focused impacted in geographical areas. Now, bearing in mind that criminality and organised crime happens all throughout the province and affects every single one of us in the province, whilst you could argue that paramilitary activity and grip some communities had varying degrees throughout Northern Ireland, there's probably not a constituency in Northern Ireland that hasn't been affected by paramilitarism, either in certain areas or in certain activities. Border areas would have been, criminality, smuggling, punishment beatings in built-up areas, building sites with regards to racketeering, businesses with racketeering, community groups being infiltrated with paramilitaries. So you have it all. If that cocktail of disaster, and that has went right across Northern Ireland, how can you assure us, how can you assure many MLAs who represent rural communities outside of Belfast or Londonderry or places where you would have a high level of paramilitary activity in comparison and contrast to the population. How can you convince and alleviate the concerns that they would have or we would have that this money is going to be allocated fairly to affect all of Northern Ireland and not just some of the hotspots, if there is such a thing?
Well, firstly, apologies if I did cause any alarm. That certainly wasn't the intention. I did mention that we would be looking at both thematic and geographic, and there are issues because I think we all accept there are some areas where geography is quite important, but actually by no means are we saying the bulk or any portion of the money at the moment is specifically set aside for particular areas. Certainly the work that the police would be doing going across. We know the scourge of drugs is right throughout Northern Ireland, from the smallest village right up to any inner city aspect. So all of those issues will be taken care of and will be looked at, but there are certain geographic areas where perhaps the prevalence of paramilitary is now, whether that be somewhere like Carrickfergus, where we know there's a very strong element of paramilitary activity. Those are some of the areas geographically that we would be looking to deal with and take forward. So it will be a mixture of thematic and geographic approaches.
Not getting onto the arrangements of funding, but the funding allocated by the Cross-Dee Paramilitary Programme Board for 2016-17, has all that money been allocated?
There's 5 million.
There's a 2-page list there.
Yeah, 5 million has been provided and 4 million has been allocated.
4 million allocated to all of these lists, to all of this that's listed?
All of those bodies listed are bodies that have received funding.
I'm going to come back to that in the next session because I think I'm in danger of travelling into that next session. But I'll hold that there just because I want to go into some details around these bids just from my own understanding. Sorry, that's page 72, and there's another session that's also replicated. Doug Beattie, Doug Beattie.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Anthony, thanks very much for your briefing and answering the questions so far. It can look quite complicated at times, can't it? If I go to Appendix 1 and I take you down to the 5th box down where it says policing with the community, part of this is the Chair's issue about where it talks about communities still adversely affected by paramilitarism, but I'm not sure there's any that isn't. Could you explain to me what that means in a practical term, that box, PSNI, policing with the community? What does that actually mean?
Well, what the police have pointed out in their bid was they were trying to establish a framework which would enable them to operationalise policing with the community for those communities still affected by paramilitarism. This involved the development of developing a training product to develop skills in negotiation, working with local communities, establishing community fora, working up and maybe setting up local particular groups within that. There's also some research with probation in developing a diagnostic product to identify those at risk of involvement in paramilitary activity. So it's really trying to work within that community and helping the police to deal with it at a community level.
Right, yeah, okay. So in regard to resources, does that mean more police officers for community policing and neighbourhood policing? I mean, are we going to see an increase of neighbourhood policing teams? Is that part of it, or is that?
That particular bit of it, no, wasn't about more officers on the ground. It was trying to make sure that the officers we have are engaging in the best way possible to engage the community and taking this forward, and it's developing training to actually help them do that in a better, more efficient and effective way.
But we're not in danger of allowing the communities to nearly police themselves, if that's the case, if we're just doing this as an engagement sort of exercise without actually having the police officers there. No, you see what my danger is?
Absolutely. I mean, there are community policing structures that exist within the PSNI, and what it's helping them do is be more effective in terms of the delivery on the ground by trying to develop improved ways of working with the communities to actually get the most from that interaction.
So it's really a delivery model is what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
And the money has gone to PSNI in that sense.
Can I stick you with the same table as well, and it's just for interest, the DOJ's public awareness campaign, when is that going to kick in, and what's it going to be? Do we have an outline of what that's likely to be?
We're in contract negotiations at the moment in regard to that, but really it's about a publicity campaign that hopefully we'll manage to run before Christmas, looking at aspects of crime and organised crime and how it can be affected within that community. Karen's the lead on that. Maybe Karen want to...
Katie and I have been working on it. It's difficult to add more detail because we're just in the contract negotiation period where we really can't say anything publicly at the moment. Hopefully we're not too far away. But this stems directly from Section A of Fresh Start, where there was a feeling we need to bring more attention to how much organised crime and where there are links between organised crime and paramilitaries, that we make that more understandable for the community. So we have an amount of money from Fresh Start that will hopefully enable a television campaign, but we couldn't go much further today, Mr Beattie, if that's okay. We're just in a difficult point in the discussion.
What I could say perhaps is we have run a similar programme type in the past, specifically on organised crime, called Changing the Mindset. So that sort of approach.
And the reason I mention it is, I mean, it's actually quite important because a lot of people out there are looking to see indicators of this actually kicking in, and one of those prime indicators will be when your campaign sort of kicks off, and you know, the media around your media is going to be quite a lot. I mean, so we are looking at a target date of before Christmas. So, I mean, is that roughly the area we're looking at?
That's our intention.
Okay, but we can't, and that's fine, and I don't really need to go any deeper than that. And if I can, and not be in danger of going on to the next subject, but just sort of go to the very last box in that as well. And Katie, I think this is really for yourself. We're talking about the PSNI and the tackling organised crime. Have you subcontracted out to any non-devolved agencies yet any of the funding that you have? And if so, would it show up on this?
The answer
table?
is no, we haven't.
Okay.
I'll quite happily hear, or in the next bit, on what the monies are that we've actually given out.
That was very useful. Yeah, I think if we keep that to the arrangement side of things. Sammy Douglas.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation so far. I suppose you may not be able to answer this question, but it strikes me, if we're talking about 50 million over the next 4 years or whatever, that when I look at the various agencies, is there not the danger of this become like a money grab from agencies who want money to do their bits and pieces?
You're right, there is, and that's why we're taking our time to get this right, and we're making sure that it is all based on outcome. Some of the other drivers that we're actually trying to look at is that in the bids that we're seeking to fund, that they will produce sustainable outcomes, but also that they won't have a money trap at the end where somebody comes along and says, we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. If you don't give us more money, it all stops and everything goes to rack and ruin. We're making sure that anything we fund is over that period, but actually it's going to deliver in a sustainable way without the need for further funding from a central source.
And in relation to these organisations, departments, whatever, who get this money, will they either support organisations or will they engage directly with paramilitaries? Because I know we can talk about communities, but the reality is here we're dealing with people who want to go away. It's their last chance saloon. The train's leaving the station, and I think they all know it anyway. So, and I know it's a difficult one because we're talking about organisations who are legal in that sense. So, what is how will they fund projects that deal directly with paramilitaries?
Right. First of all, we're not looking to fund paramilitaries. That's not the process, but we are concerned, and it's mentioned right throughout both documents, Fresh Start and the 3-person panel. It's about helping communities in transition to transition. So it is working with people to actually get them through that and into a different world, and that's what we're working at.
Obviously, there's a fair amount of money over the years that went into projects that work with ex-prisoners groups. I know there are some, and there's like Shank Road and other areas, and indeed in West Belfast, they did excellent work, to be quite honest, bringing people on. But in terms of, you mentioned about now looking at like the designated areas, is there much more discussion about that?
No, what I'm saying is we recognise that we have to do more work there to actually identify what of this is thematic, what of it's law enforcement, what of it's community based, what of it's geographical based. We're trying to work that through. As I say, we could be criticised here today for not spending more money and not having it done quicker, but the truth is 50 million is not a lot of money.
No.
And when you spread it over a 5-year period, roughly £10 million a year, we're trying to make sure we get the biggest bang for the buck here. We're trying to make sure that what we put the money into is actually going to deliver the outcomes. So we're trying to get the outcomes right first. We're trying to get right the actions we need, and then the funding coming in behind that to shore it up and deliver it.
And £25 million that fund would be from the British government.
Yes.
Have we got that money?
That money has not yet been released because we knew we couldn't spend any of it within this first year, so it will be released and profiled over the following 4 years.
And finally, this is a very difficult area, and we all understand that. We all understand the difficulties. And certainly what I would say is that how can we as a Justice Committee help you in your endeavours, which is a very, very difficult task, and for all these agencies as well. Would you have any advice for us?
Well, I think the advice is twofold. None of us have all the answers or the right answers. So, A, the scrutiny that you give to make sure we're doing what we're meant to do and we're doing it on time and we're delivering. But also in trying to encourage where you see issues or where you see things that we could be doing, perhaps feeding that back in. I mean, this is not going to be an action plan. There it is, it's on the wall and we're going to fund it for 5 years. This is going to be dynamic over the 5-year period, and we're not going to probably allocate all of the money in one lump and say, there you go, get on and deliver it. We want to be dynamic, so we do look forward to actually working with the Justice Committee and other bodies and other committees, because health will have a role to play here, education will have a role to play here, and it's important that we hear from each of those sectors.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Alex Abbott.
Thank you for the presentation. It's my view, Chair, that we should get a detailed written report in relation to these matters every 2 months. The panel report said that the Executive should make promoting lawfulness a key priority in the current mandate, and we need to see the evidence that it will be a key priority in this mandate. And in my view, we should get a detailed written report every 2 months, because, as Anthony rightly said, our job is in part to scrutinise what you are doing. The truth of the matter is that we don't have much detail about what is getting done. And that's why I think we need, both because of the priority around this and in order to make sure that things are getting done in the way that Anthony referred to in his reply to Sammy. And the reason why I say that is that it's 3 months now since the 19th of July when the Executive responded to the panel report. The first design day was at the end of September, which was 2.5 months after the Executive first responded. And I do think we need to get a lot more detail. So in that regard, can I ask Anthony, where are we in terms of the commitments entered into in A3, A4 and A5? Namely, that the Department of Communities will bring forward proposals in respect of A3, that the Department of Education will develop initiatives in respect of A4, and that the Executive Policing Board, PSNI, will review the resourcing and operation of policing communities in A5. I'm using those as representative examples. Where are we in terms of the proposals in A3, the initiatives in A4, and the review of resourcing in A5?
In terms of A3, we've allocated £10,000 to develop a scoping study to actually see how we can actually deliver this and take it forward. So that work is now been engaged and is ongoing.
With the Department.
Yes, with the Department of Communities to do that. We've also allocated, and I'm sorry I'm crossing over the amounts here, but apologies for that. Under that A3 as well, the Attorney General has made a bid for Living Law programme, and we've allocated £5,000 to a pilot which will work in secondary schools and community groups to actually develop that and take that forward. So we've begun that. Perhaps I should just say, going back, I know you've quoted the dates and 2.5 months and all the rest of it. We have actually been allocating funds. The actual design day was when we realised that we needed to do a bigger, more in-depth study, and that's what it's trying to do. So it's not a case that we've been sitting on our hands or we haven't been taken forward. We most certainly are.
I'm not suggesting that, but
no, I appreciate it.
It is difficult for a committee to do what you said we should do if we don't have that detail that you're now reading into the record, and that sort of detail in respect of each and all of the recommendations is what we need if we're going to do our job properly. And it's not very helpful to get this information at 10 to 4 when the officials knew that they were coming to the department for the last 4 or 5 weeks. That's why I think we need a detailed report in terms of whether, so that I and other people can say, well, is A3 being fulfilled by the allocation of £10,000 for a scoping study and for money going to the AG for his living law area? You know, if that's the height of what we're doing, it doesn't seem to me to be a very robust response to the range of what A3 should capture. But maybe there's an awful lot more going on, and an awful lot more will go on. But without that knowledge, we can't really make much sense of all of this.
I think that's a fair challenge, and I think we will endeavour to give more detailed information as we go through.
But then could I ask you in that regard, A8 says that there should be, the executive, the PSNI and the board should appoint agreed independent expert to deal with A8. Where are we in respect of the independent expert?
We have a meeting arranged for the 25th of October to actually discuss this with the Department for the Community, the Executive Office, the Northern Ireland Policing Board and the PSNI.
Is that the first meeting that's been held in that regard since the Executive published their response to the 3-panel report?
It is, yes.
Could I ask you then, where are we in respect of the appointment of the independent reviewer of separated status, as is required under, I think it's one of B recommendations? And you might be aware that the Minister will have to reply this matter in the Assembly next week, in fact on Monday.
Sorry, I'm honestly not sure.
B8.
Sorry. I think at the moment we're currently in the process of developing the terms of reference for that.
And when do you think the terms of reference for that will be concluded and that person will be appointed?
I'm honestly not sure, but I'll write to you and let you know.
Could I lay down a marker in respect of B4 and B6? Because B4 and B6 it arises from section B of the recommendations about support for transition. And we have these vague words around, and you actually quoted the words, Anthony, in your opening remarks, although I think you quoted them in respect of the overall approach. Although ambitious initiatives is only the language used in respect of communities in transition. And B4 and B6 use this vague language about ambitious initiatives and supporting creative and ambitious initiatives. Just put down a marker that that sort of language might have been used in respect of the Social Investment Fund. And we saw where some of those ambitious initiatives ended up funding. So I'm certainly putting down a marker from my party's point of view that I don't want to see that language now being used to replicate some of the Social Investment Fund approaches to initiatives and ambitious initiatives. And that's a political point. I expect you to reply to it. But I'm certainly putting down a marker because I see wriggle room in relation to some of these recommendations and the funding of those recommendations to replicate bad practice rather than develop good practice. Could I ask, there's a curious thing, Chair, in respect of Section C, tackling criminality, because all these recommendations have been accepted, but oddly one wasn't. And the one that wasn't was C, well, certainly one that wasn't, certainly in the spirit of which it was recommended, was C8, where explicitly the panel said the NIEA and the Southern EPA should be included in the cross-border Fresh Start Joint Agency Task Force. Yet the reply from the executive was, we will consider if it would benefit these agencies, which was a very curious response to a definitive recommendation of the panel, and yet this seemed to get watered down to, well, let's work out whether it would benefit these agencies. Could you explain that?
I can't explain the wording specifically that was in the response from the executive. What I can say is that the joint task...
Is justice not deep on this?
It is, sorry, I just don't have that detail with me. The Joint Agency Task Force is chaired by the two police forces, the PSNI and the Garda Síochána, and it is up to them to decide who the membership is, as and when. And I have touched, I think, before in terms of the NIEA, that they will be invited in as and when it's appropriate for them to be so, for that particular group, but I have no control. It's an independent operational police structure. So I think probably the reason it's worded in the way it is in the action plan is it's a recognition of the operational independence of policing.
Well, that's not what it says. What it says is somebody has decided whether it would benefit these agencies. It doesn't say, well, actually, the panel was overreaching here into the operational. It says somebody's made a decision to work out whether it would benefit these agencies. That's not an operational matter. That's a commentary with for a different reason. Certainly it's my view that both the EPA and the NEA should be very much part of all of that. So I don't find your answer very convincing. It may be part of the answer, but it doesn't explain. Can I ask you then this question? C4, this is about investigative capacity of the PSNI and work with the NCA. And the PSNI has submitted a funding proposal, and we'll come to that in the next session about what all that looks like. But can I ask you a very specific question in respect of tackling organised crime? Will you provide to the committee the criteria that are being used across all the funding streams, but including this one in respect of investigative capacity, the criteria that was used to decide whether the PSNI bid would be granted or not?
Yes.
And in specific terms, was there a decision made that when it came to releasing new money, fresh start monies for investigative capacity, that the organised crime had to have real community impact, and that a decision was made that in respect of illegal assets from the past, that the PSNI would not be funded or would not seek funding in order to build up its investigative capacity to deal with that?
Number of points there I'll run through. If you wish, I can run through the criteria, or I can send it to you. It's up to yourselves which you want.
I'll leave that to the chair.
Well, again, is it simple? Is it simple?
Yes, it's reasonably straightforward.
Or is it better that we'd have it in writing?
Yes, we'll send it in writing then.
I think, is that okay, Alex? You happy enough that we have it?
Yes.
Right, in writing. We'll expect that as soon as possible.
I just suggest that, Chair, because we've brought with us a document that we would like to go back and make sure that's absolutely in line this might be paraphrasing what we've got back in the office, I would like to write to you with absolute accuracy, if that's okay.
The accuracy of what, sorry, Karen?
We've got a document here that describes the criteria, but I think it's better that we write to you with the
Right.
exact
criteria.
words.
Yeah. No, okay, I'm content, I'm happy enough. I'd rather have
Yes.
I'd rather have correct information than
Okay.
suspect. You happy enough, Alex?
Yes, but also very specifically this question about real harm to the community and whether that is deemed not to refer to the issue of historic assets or assets that were illegally gathered in previous times.
The bid from the PSNI was to look at the development of current investigative capacity and intelligence gathering to actually tackle these issues here and now. As you know, there is an ongoing review of criminal assets that PSNI, the NCA, etc., engage in and go forward, and that is part of normal policing and does happen at that level. This was the build-up specifically to tackle paramilitary activity and organised crime at this point in time.
Well, we'll see the criteria and I'm sure we'll come back to it. One final question. The NCA still, given the muddle, to put it mildly, of last October, when they made a bid and then they were told to withdraw the bid, and then the Secretary of State said the bid was only for illustrative purposes, but that didn't seem to be the view of the NCA Director General. Has the NCA made a bid now?
No.
Are you not a bit surprised that, given all that the NCA did last October in preparing for a bid, to be told to withdraw the bid, to be then told that the bid was for illustrative purposes? Are you not a bit surprised that the NCA have suddenly gone quiet in terms of that?
Well, they haven't gone quiet. We're actually engaging with the NCA at the moment. As I said the last time I was here, there was an issue about whether executive money could be used to fund a non-devolved body. What we have agreed and what we have gone through, and that was what I was going to say in the next bit of mine, is that we have been got clarity now through the Department of Finance that we can, where a bid requires input from a non-devolved body, that the lead department that they're working with can bid as part of that and then contract directly with the NCA. So the NCA are working with the police and ourselves to put in a bid to tackle certain aspects of this work.
And I'm meeting with NCA colleagues tomorrow on that very point.
So it hasn't that it hasn't gone away. We're just going through the processes to make it happen.
Thank you.
Okay, Trevor Long.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I must say, every time I look at these recommendations, I just get slightly more discouraged, because somebody else mentioned their vagueness, and I would say the blackness. I keep looking for the one where, if I was a leading paramilitary, which I'm not, would terrify me, would actually worry me that they might be trying to get to the heart of the problem here. And I see nothing in these recommendations that really hits the spot. And some of them are so bland that it's almost humorous. I'm looking here at A6, for instance. Strategic objectives for PCSPs. We should ensure that the partnerships focus on building community confidence in the rule of law and embedding a culture of lawfulness. What have they been doing for the last 5 years? Surely that's no way in advance. A7 is that the designated organisations on those PCSPs should be at sufficiently senior level and committed to building effective partnerships. And what does that mean? What way does that differ from the original concept of what PCSPs were about? You could take that as being rhetorical. Alex mentioned A8. This is the one where the policing board should review their protocols for engaging with representatives of paramilitary groups. Now, I see that you're working at this idea of an agreed independent expert, and there's been meetings and so on. But, I mean, to what extent does the PSNI need advice on how to negotiate with criminals? That's the simple question. We're talking about the representatives of paramilitary groups, criminals. The policing board, the police already tried to work with them, negotiate. There's a fine line they have to tread. Don't be too critical of them. But what skill set would an independent expert bring to the party that would aid the police in how they deal with known criminals?
It's about working with the community rather than known criminals in that sense. It's working about how we build up community capacity. It's working through how we help young people transition away from joining paramilitary organisations. There's a range of issues and areas. I mean, is it vague in terms of the responses? Well, we had a very short time frame to actually put all of this together. The panel had 6 months to go out, research, detail their responses in terms of what they were going to put forward. We've had a very short time frame from there to take it forward. There is much more work to be done, we fully accept that, and we're trying to look at how we can do that. And it's not just working with one delivery partner, there's multiple delivery partners, there's community-based groups. Also, going back to a point that I made earlier, 50 million isn't a lot of money, but the executive has put in a lot more money into these areas and these issues through EBOC, good relations, all of that. What we're trying to make sure is that we work together to actually harness the best impact of all of that money going forward, not just the 50 million that is singly allocated to this particular programme.
Could I add, Mr. Lynn, I think looking just at the executive action plan, those actions and commitments need to be seen in the context of the broader description that was in the three-person panel report. So just for the record, paragraph 4.15 of the three-person panel report sets the context for recommendation A8. And basically it's saying where we are now can't be a norm and we've got to move that on. And the commitment then was to bring someone in to see how we might do that.
Thanks for that. I'm just taking a couple more at random here, Chair, if you don't mind. The C1, tackling criminality. The strategies and activities of the PSNI should be updated to reflect a shift in focus from paramilitary activity to criminality. What is the difference? I mean, what do you mean is the shift from paramilitary activity to criminality by paramilitaries, effectively? It's the same people doing much the same things. So, I mean, what I see the response here that the strategies and activities will be updated by the PSNI as appropriate. Again, I would assume they've been doing that for years. And in what way is this a fresh start? And I may as well group them for you. I've got C5. UK government should resource the NCA and HMRC to appropriately prioritise intensive work to tackle organised crime linked to paramilitary groups. Well, I don't think that whatever percentage of 10 million a year that finally trickles through to, well, actually half of that, because this will be the UK government's contribution, is going to make an awful lot of difference to the funding of the NCA. And that just seems statement for statement's sake. You know, it doesn't add anything to the fight against paramilitaries. It's emphasising the fact that the NCA and HMRC are involved, that they have a role to play, which they're already playing. But what does this add to the equation? Why would that worry a paramilitary organisation?
Firstly, the NCA, the HMRC, other involved bodies, as the police, are resourced to tackle criminality on a day-to-day basis, and they do tackle it on a day-to-day basis. The point of this money, this 10 million over each year for 5 years, 50 million in total, was to actually help in terms of trying to join up approaches, look at initiatives that could actually be funded extra over and above the work that's already being done and carried forward by each of these agencies. So it is additionality, it is looking at new work, it is looking at what more can be done. And let's be honest, we've been living in a period of austerity for quite some period of time now, and budgets in all of these bodies have been getting cut. So this money hopefully will allow additionality, additional work and joined up working to go forward in a sense that really makes a bigger impact. So we're actually talking about something that's greater than the sum of the parts.
In relation to C1, again, the broader context is at paragraph 4.44 of the panel's report. The panel were really concerned with language, and I think they were trying to suggest that focusing on the term paramilitary activity didn't help people understand the criminality side of it.
Okay, right, well.
Sorry. The panel were concerned with language, and focusing on the language around paramilitary activity didn't help people understand the criminality. It maybe touches on Mr. Beattie's point as well, and the need to make sure people understand exactly what's going on here, that there are levels of criminality here that need to be tackled.
We know that there's quite a number of organised crime gangs operating between north and south at the moment, from all sorts of shades, from local domestic to foreign organised crime groups that come in. One thing that we do know is that not every organised crime group are paramilitaries, but that nearly all paramilitaries have some involvement in organised crime.
Yeah.
And that's where we're trying to work and specifically tackle those particular areas. Now that covers duty evasion, which, if you break it down into its component parts, is cigarette smuggling, it's fuel smuggling, it's counterfeiting of products, it's all of those sorts of things, sale of alcohol, etc. You can have a look, there's extortion, there's human trafficking, there's blackmail, all of these things that are normal policing issues that the police are tackling. But what this money is trying to do is help take a more encompassed view of all of those bodies working together specifically to tackle those paramilitary bodies that are involved in that particular work over and above the work that they would do on a day-to-day basis.
The police estimate that there's something like 150 different organised crime gangs operating in the north, and probably in the south as well.
It's closer to 300, I think, in the south.
Okay, well, it's even worse. Have you any idea what percentage of them you could say had no paramilitary connection at all?
No, I couldn't, because to be honest, even the ones who say are Eastern European, they may trade or work with paramilitary groups, they may pay some form of protection, or they may work with each other.
Yes.
So it's a very complicated
Yeah, but you're actually
area.
making a point from me, Anthony, that even the ones you might say this is some kind of Romanian gang involved in human trafficking, they need the cooperation of local paramilitary groups to operate here.
Well, some do and some don't. I mean, it depends on the area, but as I said, we do know that these paramilitary organisations are heavily involved in criminal gangs.
Oh, well, hang on. As you say, 50 million's not a lot of money over 5 years, but I suppose it's better than one.
Better than nothing.
Yeah, okay.
Roy Beggs.
Again, thanks for the presentation. There's no doubt that organised criminal gangs and paramilitaries are still involved in serious crime and drug dealing and extortion. Certainly I'm picking up that in my area, and we do need it to change. But the relatively high levels of paramilitarism can be a problem in the community itself. To heal itself and address social issues, particularly where there's a weak community infrastructure. Who wants to put their head out and become a community leader? We saw what happened in Newton Ours, wasn't it? Or was it Bangor? When that happened a relatively short time ago. So I'm interested in how that community void, which often exists in some area, is. And I see that as a systemic issue that needs to be addressed as well. How is that going to be addressed? Because where there's deprivation, it can often be exacerbated by the paramilitarism as well, because genuine need is not addressed, local issues are not addressed, extra funding, extra support is not drawn in because there's no community infrastructure to do that. And looking at my own area, I'm sure there's other areas similar. Actually, since the ceasefires, we've had UVF, UDA feuds. We've had mainstream UDA against South East Antrim UDA feuds. We've had South East Antrim breakaway UDA feuding against a section of it, and the community is very, very weak and fragmented, and people generally keep their heads down because of the degree of paramilitarism and fear that has been there. So what I'm trying to understand in your plans is how you help address that issue, because I don't see that clearly. You talk about the housing sector, it's going to be a community empowerment, and the Department of Justice, one of the headings was community engagement and coordination, I think. How is the building going to happen on the ground? How are those who are not wanting to leave their past behind them to be drawn away, so the drug dealers are dealt with, those involved in criminality are dealt with, and the community can be allowed to build and address its needs?
Well, that's what we're working through at the moment. That's why we're trying to take the time to develop plans that actually do that. For example, the work that the Department for the Communities is doing in terms of how do we develop women and the role of women within communities to build up those sorts of networks. How do we build networks within communities as well? How do we actually engage with police, law enforcement agencies? How do we move young adults and children away from seeing Brigadier X as being the role model that I want to follow? How do we get through that idea of people being so afraid that they can't speak up within their communities about what South Antrim UDA are doing or what UVF are doing or others? It's about trying to develop that confidence, and that's why we're talking about communities in transition. And it will be also working with people who were former paramilitaries who want to move on, whether they be ex-prisoners or not. We've been doing this since the signing of the Belfast Agreement in 1998. So this is looking at it and trying to really put more emphasis on developing community-based approaches to a lot of this.
One of the absences that I've seen in your discussions and your documentation has been local councils and community planning. From that, potentially you get long-term sustainability. Why has there been no reference of local councils, their community development role and community planning to date?
Well, you're absolutely right. They are an essential part, and that's where we see the PCSPs as a real delivery arm and a real connection, because they are part of that process, as is every department. So every department is part of community planning, and that's why every department is here. And we are working with councils, and we will continue to work with councils going forward in a number of these areas.
Again, I think of disjointed funding that has been there. I think in terms of the Craigie Hill and Evil area in Larne, where there was funding through the housing sector for areas at risk, and there was a good community council created, which wasn't dominated by any group. Funding disappeared, nothing was left behind, very weak community infrastructure, and yet there's still a high level of paramilitaries in the background, some huge new aggressive murals putting up right in the middle of the community in your face, aggressive murals. So I'm just wanting to reiterate the importance of long-term action and support, and not short-termism. And ultimately, community development is best when somebody hand is held and they're still around to help. Yes, we do need the community to come in, but there's a danger in leaving it all to the full-time employees. So how are you going to create a sustainable method that will be continuing on for decades?
Well, you're absolutely right. We shouldn't see this in a single silo-based approach, because there's a lot of good work that's already going on cross-departmentally. Things like building a united community.
Sorry, what did it do in Larne?
Specifically, I'm not quite sure. I can't say, I don't have it with me at the moment, but what I do know is that we are tackling those areas. We've got interface programme boards. We have good relations programme boards. What we're trying to do, and that's what I'm at least trying to take forward through the cross-departmental working group, is that we don't look at just 50 million over 5 years. We're trying to look at what these other areas are doing, these other programmes are doing, and try to bring together an approach that will deal. I know exactly what you're saying. We are trying to do exactly what you're suggesting.
You're saying you're trying to create a coordinated long-term approach. Would you
Yes.
accept that SIF funding is completely outside the box and all the other mainstream areas of activity, and not using the normal delivery mechanisms?
I don't know enough about it to actually be able to give you an answer. I apologise, but I just don't know specifically enough to do it.
Maybe on a slightly more positive note, on the design day that Anthony mentioned at the end of September, the first thematic that we took for going away and thinking about it in more detail was community engagement. And that's leading us into a process of commissioning that will have to address everything you've just said there, Mr Beggs. Who do we need? What assets are already in the community? Who's already in that space? Who's best placed to help us deliver?
I mean, there are some groups, partnerships already working, which are occupying that space, and it's important that you build on them. And do not start with new bits of paper. Community connections have been made and are moving along the process, but in other areas, you're very low ebb.
No, sorry, if I give you the impression this is a clean everything away and start, we're looking at what actually exists and we're trying to build on that good practice and actually develop it and strengthen it where we can.
Okay, Michaela Boyle.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anthony, for your presentation. I just want to support the Chair and what he said earlier about ensuring and maintaining that this is rural-proofed, this funding is rural-proofed, particularly, and you did mention a few times around the border areas and what type of paramilitary activity goes on in the border areas, which is mainly the rural areas, particularly from the constituency that I represent. On A4, Anthony, I welcome that. I do believe at last someone has sat up and took notice that, in terms of trying to deal with vulnerable young people, that the masses of young people at some stage in their lives will be at schools and within our education sectors. But I'm a bit concerned just, about how do you intend to do this within the schools, because I know you may meet with some resistance from educators around, I have to teach the curriculum, I have no time to deal with this. It should be outside of school or otherwise. I support A4, and I do believe, as I said, the masses of young people are within our school sectors, and if we're talking about early intervention methods, again, I want to just mention the fact that mental health as well as a contributing factor to the transgenerational issues that we have, also in terms of organised crime and paramilitary activity, because in areas that I represent, it's kind of the same families, year on year, that kind of thing. So I just want to know, how do you intend to work out A4 within the education sector? And as I say, will there be a resistance from those involved?
I honestly don't know if there will be a resistance to those involved. I mean, most people are resistant to change, full stop, and then you have to help them move forward and show them what's in it for them and the benefit. That's the importance of having every department represented on the cross-departmental group, including the Department of Education, to see how they can do that. And obviously, they have control of the curriculum as well. So if there are issues that are being addressed, it is within their gift to have a look at that. In terms of your earlier point on rural proofing, that is part of the criteria that we are looking at to see, does it meet the conditions of rural proofing, and actually try and take this forward. Because the truth is, this affects all of society in Northern Ireland, and we're trying to bring it through on that basis.
I think it's a matter of, it's not a matter of does it?
It does, yes. It does. I fully accept that. And early intervention, I mean, one of the ways to make sure that these groups disappear and go away is to cut off the lifeblood of new people going into them. By trying to actually get early interventions, trying to get children and young people, young adults, to see that this isn't the way forward. I mean, there are communities out there where people don't have jobs, don't have high educational expectations, and in many ways this is seen as a career path, and we have to remove that. We have to take that away.
Transgenerational issues that I
Absolutely,
mentioned,
and
you know,
that's
the same families that seem to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of those
And
things are
communities.
recognised, and that's why, going back to Trevor's question, why there isn't a specific, here we're going to go, we're trying to work that through, we're trying to explore how best we actually address each of these issues. We will be building up delivery plans that actually come out in the detail that I think people would like to see.
And again, I just, like other members, I want to make the comment that as someone who sat on the Western Steering Group for the SIF funding, which was £80 million, you could have spent that money twice, three times over. You know, so 50 million, there will be high expectations coming out of this £50 million, and like everything else, there are going to be a lot of people and organisations and groups from across the sector very disappointed.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. It is certainly 50 million and it's ring-fenced and kept at that level, but there's a lot of other money going into TBUC, good relations, urban villages and all the rest of it. There's a lot we can do working together, so we shouldn't just see it as 50 million. We should see what is the money the executive's putting in and how best do we maximise and leverage that. And a lot of this might be leveraged for other things to actually deliver. So, but 50 million won't cure all our ills. That's the truth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Claire.
Thanks. It's good to read about the Living Law programme that the Attorney General will be working on. And I was just wondering if you have any sort of updates on that. Has the programme been expanded or has it been developed?
It's something the Attorney does already. He speaks
Yeah.
at schools and he asked for a very modest amount to develop that further, to take him in, maybe into schools that he wouldn't have got to see ordinarily. So we very much welcome the fact the Attorney was very interested, and one of his staff sit on our group as well. So yeah, it's a good thing.
And do we know what other schools he'd be going or what the sort of programme will be entailing?
We can see if we can.
We can ask them and see if he will provide us some detail on that.
Just for my own interest, it sounds good.
Yes.
But I was actually heartened to read in the 3-panel report as well, and they were talking about UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and they went on to sort of they talked about the experiences of women in Northern Ireland in relation to paramilitarism as shaped and defined not merely by their role as victims, and that the ex-prisoner groups and former paramilitaries that they met were almost exclusively men, and that gender was a key issue to exclusion and marginalisation of women within our communities. So I was just going to try and ask if this had been picked up at the cross-departmental meetings, if there was any discussion around the implementation of 1325, or if we could develop that model maybe specifically for ourselves within this whole programme.
Well, the Department for the Communities is taking the lead in that specific area, and they will be bidding for money to do that. At this point in time, they're actually scoping out what this means, what sort of programme they can develop, what way they can deliver it. So you're absolutely right, it's a very important area, and basically the Department for the Communities will be coming with their proposals to the cross-departmental board to get their share of what's 46 million left.
Yeah.
We also note as well, it wasn't just the panel that said we should have a focus on women. Fresh Start Agreement itself in Section A flagged it right from the outset. So
yes, couldn't find it there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly been on our radar right from the minute Fresh Start came through, and colleagues in communities are taking the lead on that. It's really important.
Yeah, but I am aware that the Department for Communities is looking at both, have started the co-design group, co-design, and they're looking at what they can do there. But as far as I'm aware, that's just one part of what's going on. So I'd be keen to hear if the Justice Department are looking at anything at all in there as well, in terms of ex-prisoners and dealing, you know, with crime and paramilitarism within families.
There's a representative from the Department of Justice on the Department for Communities co-design group to ensure that women who are involved in the justice system will be represented through that programme.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, is that you, Claire? Thank you. I resisted the temptation to go into every single action. The trouble with an action plan is that there's actions,
yes,
and that's what we'll be scrutinising in the future. I do agree with Alex that this is one of our priorities. This is one of our main priorities out of 5. So this is something that we're very keen to see progressed. And as I think Sammy laid down the spirit of this in the fact that the committee is here to help.
Absolutely.
We're here to advise and support as well as scrutinise. So we want to see progress, and we realise 50 million is not a lot of money over 5 years. We realise 5 years is a very short window, because this is generational. And I know a lot of stuff is already happening, and it's been happening as years. I can remember being at school and reading books about divides and everything else that was happening then. So we're not reinventing the wheel. What I see is this is if you like, an injection or a kickstart into making sure we do things better from here on in, making sure that all the agencies are working in this or all could join together by the end of the 5 years, so that at least there's massive progress made at the end of 5 years and we're all going in the right direction. I think what we'll need from now on, because we are going to be scrutinising this very closely, because it's one of our priorities, I think what we will need from now on is in each action point, whether it be A4, A5 or C4, B8 or whatever, is that we have an actual progress report and timeline. Now, I know that in 2 months' time, 6 months' time, 8 months or a year's time, there may be some of this stuff that hasn't been actioned yet. And I think it would be ill-advised of us to hammer anyone because of that. But what we would want at that point is say, well, look, we haven't done anything yet because of the reasons here, and that we plan to do this in the near future or the distant future. And at least that gives us scope and a context for that actual action point. Because looking at them, some of them are vague in themselves, some of them can be quite clear and focused. So I think it would be useful moving forward, so that we're not asking, and it'll be our duty to ask on every action point, but if we can see it in black and white in front of us, what actions happened, what was the effect, what's the progress, and then the timeline for future events or work. We'll have to add on to that the finance, the funding that's went into each action point, or at least each group setting, as I'd said before. But I think that'll be very, very useful going forward. And I think it will even, whilst it'll not stop us scrutinising, and we won't want it to stop us scrutinising, it would actually aid us in scrutiny, and it will also maybe mean we'll not take up so much time about going into every group, because we can see clearly in advance what progress has been made, if that's possible moving forward.
Just to mention as well, we have the international body that will be coming along to look at this yearly. And if that is set up in the early part of next year, we were already thinking that we should give you a written update before we provide our first report. That group, when it's established, is bound to ask us for a baseline. Where are you today?
Yes.
They can come back and look at it again. So absolutely accept what Mr. Atwood said about the need for scrutiny. I would question whether you'll see progress every 2 months, but it's for the committee to ask as often as you wish. But we would already planning with your agreement, Chair, that we would offer you something before Christmas before we provide it to the international body.
I think this is much to do with the wording of each one of these descriptions, because it says the Department of Education will do this, it says the Executive will do this, and that's the language that's being used at the minute. The Attorney General will expand his Living Law programme. So it's all about it's all about what we're going to be doing. I think we need to get to that point, and I understand why it's written like that, because we're into this new programme. You've had since July basically to set it out. We've had the action plan since then, but from here on in we'll be expecting, well, this is what's been done in the last 6 months, and here's the effects, and this is the funding that's caused or spent on this action point, and this is the timeline going forward. I think that's not too much to ask when it comes to scrutiny, because I think it will save you time when you're sitting in this end.
You're absolutely right. It's for the committee to determine what information it wants, how it wants it, and the nature of that. We'll provide that. Hopefully it means the scrutiny will be the shorter bit, and then the support. And
yes. That's where I want to get
forward
to.
will be better. No, yeah. I'm all for that. As I said, that's why I felt the committee had that double edge, and we're quite happy to work with you to ensure that we both get the best out of it.
Okay, and moving on then, we'll go on to the funding arrangements. Sorry.
My own view, having heard everything from Anthony and the other officials, is that the officials should be invited back next month. And the reason is that if they would provide all that they can provide in terms of the implementation actions and timelines arising from the various recommendations, noting that you'll not want to share the policy that's in development, a word that you'd be very familiar with in relation to a different matter at the moment, well, at least purportedly in relation to another matter at the moment, because I'm none the wiser, Chair, after 2 hours or an hour and a half, whatever it is, about where, in some more detail and granular terms, where we are. And if we wait, as Karen might have suggested, that we'll actually put it on for longer than 2 months, what we're really saying is, Chair, is that we only have the officials in this matter before us twice, between now and Christmas and next summer. Whereas my view is we should have the officials on this matter before the committee 4 times between now and next summer, once in November and then 3 times between January and the recess next July. And in that way you can drill down and support. But I think we need to drill down first, because I don't know, we don't have much data before us. What do we have before us?
Aspirations, basically.
Well, we have details, for example, of funding, but no figures.
Yeah, well, we're going to come on to that.
So I believe, Chair, that we should have the officials back next month and then 2 months thereafter, that they should provide now the details that they can in respect to each recommendation, including the criteria for assessment of bids and full allocation of monies. Now, we don't have that. Really, we are working in a vacuum, and we can't work in a vacuum on this issue, because this issue is out there. However it emerged this time last year, it emerged, and we could all speculate about what was really going on at that time, but I think we'd be neglectful if we don't do this piece of work in that way now.
Can I make a suggestion? I mean, we will certainly send you the detail of the information you've asked for that we have at the moment, and we can do that in a written summary. I think if we could come back at the start of December rather than the middle of November, just to give us a chance to get some more of this work actually progressed, it would actually be better. And then if it's 2 months thereafter, that's fine, because we will be working to make a report to the IRC, which we do think will be up in January. So rather than give you something in November and then maybe something going in December, if we could do it that way, I think would aid us, and then every 2 months thereafter is fine.
I'm mindful of our work programme, and the fact
your
that
choice.
we've got 3 meetings in November, 3 meetings in December because of recesses, that would worry me too.
But no, I'd certainly go with that.
And plus, whilst we are asking, because of our 5 priorities, there's things that we can do in all of our priorities, but this one, at the minute, all we can see that we can do on Fresh Start is scrutinise and support. We don't see that we need to necessarily do another body of work outside of the work that's being done. So that's why on this priority it's all about scrutiny and support. So I would agree with Alex that we need to keep that going continuously, but we also don't want to burden the officials that are actually producing these actions. So, if you come back to us and say, well, look, we have to do this report for an international body, we have to do this report for the OJ, we have to do this report for Home Office or whatever, or NIO, then if that can coordinate so that you're doing the one report with the same data,
Yes, that would be very helpful. So
that might work out, that falls into place nicely for you, as opposed to having to do one report for one body 1 week of January and then a second report for us the second week of January, whenever the information isn't far off. So we can work with you on that, but we really do want to support and scrutinise and be a partner in this regard.
And absolutely, we want to do that as well, and come as often as you need us to explain what you want us to explain.
Some of you want, and we're going to go on to the funding arrangements, but
I just want one concern that I would have, and it's this, is that I think there's some of this information we may not be able to get from the officials or the department. An example would be, my concern would be the National Crime Agency. They tend to operate at a level, and some of this criminality that we're talking about in Northern Ireland probably under the radar in terms of scale. Now we talked, like Trevor mentioned, 150 and these organised crime.
It went up to 300.
Bangor, and then
Well,
300.
No, 3.
Down in the south or something.
Yes.
Anyway, so I don't know what size are they, but certainly from my own reading and research, that some of these crime gangs in Northern Ireland, they're not millionaires, but they're making enough to keep them happy and that. So, to be honest, I can't see the National Crime Agency dealing with them. Obviously, the other agencies, but
I mean, the police deal with crime.
yeah.
The NCA
I'm talking about the
deals
crime
with,
gangs. That's what I'm talking about.
with organised crime and organised crime networks. They work together on an operational level. There will be aspects of the work that they do that I would not be bringing to this committee because it would be inappropriate, because I don't even know the detail of what they do. You know, that's operational policing, and that's where the policing board has an oversight role in that. But certainly, you're right, there's different layers and different strata that we need to look at. But Karen, you wanted to add something?
I think the policy point around thresholds is a really important one. If we want NCA's assistance, then we're really asking them to work with the police on groups that they wouldn't feature on their radar in other parts of the United Kingdom. Okay. That's part of the discussion.
That's part of that. Okay.
Certainly detecting willingness that they want to help in those areas.
That's good.
It's a really important point.
Thanks so much, Karen. Thank you.
Okay, now, do you want to say a piece then, Anthony, about the arrangements funding then? And maybe if you can, without labouring the point and running out a list, but obviously we've got bids, a list of bids, but there's absolutely no pound signs anywhere near them. And you have talked about 4 million allocated, but...
Yes, lots of bits of paper. I had the speech that I was going to make. I think we've overlapped it. I want to see if your time and your effort. What might be easier is if I ran through the amounts of money that sits with those particular bids. Would that be easier for you?
Yeah, we'll probably have the information anyway that we can record it, and probably it'll be run into the record, that's for sure.
Yes, okay, that's fine. The Housing Executive bid for 3 programmes on community empowerment, we allocated them £498,000. So we did. The Department for the Community's preparatory work for Fresh Start, we allocated £100,000. The Department of the Community's work in terms of a scoping study for community cohesion, that was £10,000 for that particular bid. The PBNI bid for the Inspire programme is $398,000. What I should point out, just so that you recognise that, particularly in that bid, only 25,000 of it is actually going into the PBNI. The rest of that money they are using into community-based groups to actually deliver the work that they're doing right across Northern Ireland. So I'm giving you the department or the statutory agency, but the money might be spent well within the community going forward. In terms of the PSNI, in terms of policing the community, that was 114,000. In terms of PPS support for implementation of committal reform, that was 48,000. PPS support for implementation of indictable cases was 111,000. The DOJ procurement of some research for interventions and resettlement was 5,000. The DOJ's consultative review on constructive activity was 110,000. The DOJ study for Restorative Justice Centre of Excellence was 60,000. The DOJ's Fresh Start Implementation Branch, which is Katie's team, is for the entire year 174,000. The DOJ's Public Awareness Campaign is 530,000, give or take, depending on the programme that we eventually end up with. Forensic Science, this was part of the original Fresh Start document where we had a bid in for that, and that's £500,000, £500,000 for that equipment. The 3-person panel secretariat, that cost £73,000 to run. The DOJ's community engagement and co-design work is £15,000. The Attorney General, I've already mentioned, is £5,000. The PSNI's dedicated investigative capacity, which we've mentioned, that was 1,123,000. And that's all of the bids.
Okay. Well, with regards to some of these, and again, so when a bid comes in, explain to us the process when a bid comes in. I suppose it would be helpful. Who monitors that? Who assesses that? Who takes that forward?
It depends where the bid comes from initially, where it comes into. It could go from a particular group into their own department, and then the departments would be the screen to bring it forward to the cross-departmental group. The cross-departmental group then looks to see does it meet the criteria, and I've touched on some of the criteria, and we will write to you, but it is things like, is it equality proofed, is it rural proofed, does it actually meet the commitments of Fresh Start, does it meet the commitments of the action plan, and we then work to actually take that forward. We have a discussion at the cross-departmental group. Is this right? Is this appropriate? Do we fund it now? Because we haven't spent all of the money, it hasn't been a case of do we do A rather than B, or do we do C? We haven't got to that point yet, but I'm sure we will. So at this point, we've looked at it. Some of the bids we've reduced, some of the bids we've thought shouldn't go forward at this point in time because we're not ready to actually take it in. So we look at it, we judge, we then make the decision. I would say we make the final decision, but actually it's the executive makes the final decision because it then runs through the monitoring returns. So it runs through June monitoring, October monitoring, January monitoring, and actually the executive will then decide whether that money does or does not go to those particular areas. So that is the process.
Do you expect most of these or some of these to be yearly bids?
To be yearly bids, I think nearly all of the organisations who bid will certainly be coming in with bigger bids. So those areas that have got 50, 60 £1,000 for scoping studies, you would imagine that they, once they get that, will be making a substantive bid. We will be looking at commissioning work and saying, given the outcomes that we want to achieve, we'll be asking how best do we achieve that, and that will be the commissioning side of it. So that could be delivery partners, whether it's the NCA, whether it's PSNI, whether it's Women for Action or Women's Aid, whatever it happens to be. I would imagine those groups will be going in through, hopefully, their lead department area.
And how do you align a bid to an action point?
Well, we're asking people to actually give us a justification why they meet that action point, what they're trying to achieve, what that outcome would be. So we're actually trying to, these are business cases, we're effectively asking people to make business cases to sell the reason why we should be funding this particular work.
You see, the PPS support of implementation of indictable cases pilot. Now, I'm very aware of that pilot scheme.
Yes.
It's actually a very good pilot scheme. I want to see it rolled out through Northern Ireland. What it will do, it'll bring early guilty pleas. It'll get it all up front. The
Yes.
PPS work extensive, everything there in front of the justice system, and then there's an early guilty plea. It quickens up justice.
It does.
But how does it eradicate paramilitarism?
Well, Karen's the lead in this particular area. I'll let her take this one.
There's a specific recommendation in the panel report that we should roll out ARDS because of the benefits it can have for the type of criminal offences that are troublesome in this area. So either paramilitary related offences or the sort of offences that paramilitaries get themselves involved in. So for example, drugs. If we could roll ARDS out across Northern Ireland to drugs related offences, we could speed up justice. The benefit for the community is they can see quicker action, and we understand that the reason why this got into Fresh Start in the first place was there was both political and community concern that slow justice was holding us back. So it's a bit of a circuitous argument, but that's the reason. If we can speed up justice in, for example, drugs cases, and the communities feel better about that, greater support for law enforcement, less reliance on other forms of justice,
yes,
then that makes a massive contribution.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. But you do realise that the pilot scheme has stopped?
Yes.
It's about rollout and trying to develop it and how we can actually bring it into day-to-day work.
The pilot scheme was actually concluded. It was a 12-month programme for the calendar year 2015. We didn't feel that we could go forward with it in 2016 without some sort of evaluation, and we were in that process, and then Fresh Start came along and said, please get on with it.
Yeah.
So only this week I've been talking to PPS and police about how we move this forward. We really do want to take some proposals to justice leaders and the Justice Minister at a meeting next week on how we would roll ARDS out and the sort of offence types that we're really interested here. And I'm going to be honest, drugs has got to be on the list somewhere. And if we get approval to roll that out, then we can update the committee on our plans for that. We think it's a game changer. We note that it stemmed from an initiative from the Lord Chief Justice, so it's really important that it's bedded in the justice agencies. It's not just the policy initiative. The DPP would love to find a way forward on it. Fresh Start gives us an opportunity.
It's very, very interesting. That is genuinely, I'm really, really interested in that field. The one up above it then, PPS again, PPS I think I'm picking on, it's not the case. Support for implementation of committal reform. Surely that's legislation?
Yes, it is. You'll remember, Chair, from the 2015 Act contains a suite of arrangements for reform with committal. The implementation of it has proven very, very complex. The amount of business change and IT change that we need to deliver it. And we're certainly not asking for money through Fresh Start to make those changes, but it needs a bit more project management, a bit more grip across all of the justice organisations to move that forward. So that's where that came from.
But again, the committal issue will speed up
Yes.
the justice system.
Yes, it has that potential, and I think all the justice agencies look forward to that coming in and having more offence types move straight to the Crown Court. And I just should say, I missed out something that's really important for the PPS on ARDS. Although the pilot didn't roll out so far during this year, the DPP took the view that he should carry on with ARDS principles for murder and manslaughter cases. And if you watch how quickly some cases are getting through to the court now, that's massive reduction.
Very, very good. Okay. I'm not picking on the PPS there. It was just those were the two that I'd highlighted, I'd seen. Just on the, I suppose this all has to tie up with our scrutiny and the progress report, the timelines. Funding will always have to be added into, and I would worry about the spend. I understand that there'll be a roll up, a ramping up of spend, but like the SIF issue, and at the end you're probably struggling with very little money and a lot of things to fund. So there'll have to be a decision very soon as to say, right, you know, something it's good, but it's not really a priority in Fresh Start. So that will have to be funded somewhere else. Surely that's coming very, very soon, because even if you wait a year, that's 1/5 of the programme rollout.
One of the things that we will be doing is actually having a look at the profile. It's been a very short rule of thumb that says it's 10 million a year for 5 years. We have flexibility. For example, we haven't taken any of HMG's money down at the moment, so that can be spread over 4 years, whatever it happens to be. And it may not be that it's 12.5.
It makes sense. It makes sense not to have it staggered.
Yes, so we're trying to look at the best profiling of this money. But you're right, there will come a point where we say, actually, it's a limited pot of money and we can't fund this out of that. But maybe looking around and saying, that's why I'm saying we should look at TPUC, Good Relations and others and see where that money can be used. Is it possible to? Because a lot of this stuff is all in the same field.
Yeah.
It's about building a lawful community approach to everything we do.
Okay, moving out. Pat, Sienna?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Anthony. Just in terms of the allocation of this funding, it says it was allocated by the Cross-Departmental Programme Board. That's right, is it?
Yes.
But is it not supposed to be the executive that allocates funding?
The workload has been given to us to take forward. We do it, but as I said, it's the executive who approves it. because it goes through the monitoring round, so it goes through all of the Department of Finance regulations, and it's the executive who then agrees to the transfer of the money. So yes, it is the executive who approves it.
And did the executive approve this allocation of funding?
They've certainly approved all of the June monitoring. There hasn't been an October monitoring. The bids will be going up through the technical process that's going to go through. So can they stop it? Yes, they certainly can.
And where exactly does the co-design model fit into this pathway between the cross-departmental body and the executive?
In terms of, we had a design day to actually see how best we can actually deliver this and how we can work across departments. So we're trying to actually build that. The co-design elements of it, I think, will come when we get into the commissioning for the spending of the bulk of the money, the 46 million that is left, in terms of here's the outcome, what can you do, and who will you be doing it with, what are the partnership arrangements. So, for example, I do envisage that the police will make stronger bids, but will bid for a piece of work with the NCA to actually involve the NCA in this. I do expect the Department of Communities will come forward looking for development for women's programmes and funding for women's groups to actually take that forward. I would expect the Office of the Executive, which holds the community relations side of it, will be working with various community groups and bidding into that, and that might be cross-community type groups working together. It might be single groups working together. I don't know until they come in, but each department will be looking to try and develop that within their own areas in terms of how they see it going forward and making their leads, because a lot of departments have other leads. We have quite a few as Justice, but other departments have leads for their own particular areas.
And I suppose, just to add to that, the community element of co-design is really important. That's really what came out of the design day. How do we, as state organisations, get into the communities, listen to what the problems are on the ground? Three-person panel did an awful lot of consultation, but in terms of putting solutions out into the community, we don't have all the answers. We accepted on the design day, we've got to go into community to discuss these things, see what the perceptions of problems are, and scoop up the solutions. And also on Mr Begg's point, there's work already going on, there's community assets all there, that we would be either ignoring or duplicating money if we didn't really understand what's going on in communities. So we accepted that as a principle at the design day.
And we have got a very strong pushback that this money shouldn't be seen as 50 million for state bodies, you know, departmental bodies, police and other statutorial bodies. It has to be right across the entire piece. Certainly there will be a law enforcement element, there will be a community element, there will be an education element, etc. as we go forward, and maybe even something in mental health as well.
And I can see the way it is it's planned that it'll pan out in the future, but in terms of this funding allocation, was there any co-design element to these bids?
Not in the sense that Brian was talking about in his presentation a little while back. We haven't got to that now. It wasn't to say that there isn't. So, for example, Reset, the money I described for the probation board, 398,000, that is co-designed because the work is being coordinated by the probation board and they're hiring a person to do that. That's £25,000. But the bulk of that, 373,000, is actually being spent in community groups to actually deliver the work. So yes, that is a co-design project in itself.
I think the housing, sorry, Mr.
And the housing executive.
The housing executive bid is rolling out things that are already being worked on in the community. As I understand it, Katie, that wasn't completely new thinking. It was things around bonfires and other community engagement type initiatives.
Okay. And I suppose I'm just a wee bit confused here. Have these organisations been informed that their bids have been successful?
Yes.
Okay. So it's just then, and the reason the confusion's here is because this funding has been allocated by the cross-departmental programme board, yet it's supposed to be the executive that approves it, and there really has been no co-design element to it all. So whatever the process is supposed to be, you know, you've outlined how it should work in the future, It certainly hasn't worked in this part of the scheme.
Well, all of the people on the cross-departmental board are senior representatives of each department. So each department has been fully informed. I'm assuming that each one has taken it through their minister in terms of the proposals that they've put forward. So effectively, if a minister has stopped it, then the minister has stopped it. And all of it is approved by the executive through the funding and monitoring approaches. So I do believe that this has got the buy-in and the sanction of the executive.
Everything.
But presumptuous, ma'am.
No, it's a really important point that as officials we can't just allocate and stand over executive money. So what we've done, everything approved prior to 1st of September has been to the executive and has been sanctioned through the monitoring rounds. The final allocations were done on the 1st of September and a couple following up from that. And we've informed people that the money's allocated subject to endorsement in the October monitoring round. Okay. We wouldn't presume.
Thank you.
Trevor, you want to come on the back of a question?
It was just on the back of Pat's. Sorry, Andy, you mentioned the October monitoring round. Have I got it right here? These bids have been approved. The organisation has been told their bids are successful.
Subject to approval by the executive.
Yes, and the October monitoring round would be the time when they would find out.
Some of them got it in June monitoring round and have gone through, but the bulk of it would be probably more in the October monitoring round. Yes.
But I understand it's to happen on, there's been an announcement about that on Tuesday. Is that correct?
I don't know, is the truth.
Well, Chair, I think actually it is correct. And just in terms of the monitoring round, I'm a bit surprised this committee hasn't received any information about the monitoring round, which is apparently to be announced, discussed on Tuesday. Just putting that on the record.
We had the finance people up last week now, and there was a brief discussion around that, or statement made or something around the monitoring round, but I don't know the detail.
My understanding is if there isn't a monitoring round as such, there will be a technical adjustment. These things will still go through and be approved by the executive or rejected by the executive. So there will be some process to make it work.
Okay, let's point the wee inch. And I know there's a list of people on them, so I'll give you the wee inch.
Just more a comment, but just I'm going back to the SIF funding again, and one of the criticisms of the SIF funding that I was hearing on the ground was that, you know, on some of the projects, a lot of the money was spent on consultants, and you know, by the time it actually got to the project on the ground, there was very little left. Would the same, you know, in your interpretation of that, do you think, is that open for the same to happen here with this funding?
I mean, I would be scrutinising every bid that comes in to make sure that certainly wasn't the case. Anything that was spending lots and lots of money on consultancy, I would put a big question mark, and they would have to really... I don't mind, sort of, as you've seen in there, funding things that are research scopes or whatever, and that's usually with the universities. But if it was a consultancy, then I would be questioning what is coming out of that, how it would be going, so it would get a very rigorous examination.
Okay, Alex Atwood.
And can I apologise because I've got child-minding challenges, so I have to leave as soon as you answer. So apologies to everybody for that. What was the total amount of bids that were declined, as opposed to 4 million that was approved?
There were, I don't have the figures to hand, but we can certainly write with that. There weren't any bids that were actually declined as such. Some bids, the board felt that it was too early in the process. The 3-person panel report hadn't actually been published at that stage. It was too early in the process to be making long-term funding commitments in certain areas, so they were deferred, and the departments that had bid were offered the opportunity to bid again once the panel report was released. Some of them did, some decided that they would wait until a longer-term implementation plan was being developed to feed in their proposals at that stage.
There was a significantly larger bid from the PSNI that was multi-layered. It went over a 5-year period, and we said we couldn't look at that at that point because it was in advance of the 3-person panel report. So that's why we narrowed down what funding we give them, and that's why it's the 1.123 at this point in time.
Is the £1 million of the Executive's allocation in this financial year, is it anticipated that will be spent?
Everything that we've allocated, we've been very rigorous in asking people, can you spend it? Because what I don't want is an underspend of this money. And what isn't spent will be carried over, so it's not lost. It doesn't drop in the monitoring rod.
So the £1 million that hasn't been allocated so far,
go forward into next
financial
year. Yeah.
It won't be allocated in this financial year?
No.
Not unless somebody comes up with something very, very quickly.
And it's very hard to see, because by the time people make a bid and then put the process in to spend it, it's very difficult to get that done by the 31st of March.
And is there danger that, given that no other projects were declined funding because they weren't mature enough to be supported for funding, is there any danger that some of these bids that were funded
wouldn't have been?
Was more that they were funded for funding's sake,
No.
as opposed to?
No, because we had a very clear discussion that any money that we couldn't allocate went forward into future years, and we were not making, this was what when I was in health service we used to describe as March Madness.
Yeah.
Spending it before it disappeared. This money, that's why we didn't draw down any money from HMG. We simply knew we couldn't get projects up, running and forward. That would have been madness to do that, so no is the answer.
One other question, and I really don't want to cross into the authority of the policing board, so I will raise these matters with our member of the policing board, and he can raise them through the policing board in respect to the PSNI allocations. But I am surprised by policing with the community to establish a framework which will enable the operationalisation of policing with the community in those communities still adversely affected by paramilitarism. Now, I was on the policing board. Pat was on it. Are you still on it? Yes. And Trevor, he was on it.
Yeah.
I don't think he's on it anymore. And Roy, were you on it?
No.
No. Well, there was 3 or 4 of us who were on the policing board. I would have thought that the police had a framework for the operationalisation of policing with the community, because policing with the community was a core pattern recommendation, and culturally, in fact, it was the recommendation. And ever since, policing with the community has been part of every policing plan. So I'm a bit surprised that the police are saying we have to establish a framework for the operationalisation of policing with the community, given that since 2002 and the board was established, it's been a core element of its business.
It has, and they do, and this, as far as I was understanding the bid, was actually to work specifically in the area of paramilitarism and those specific issues. So it was, they do certainly have a framework for dealing with communities and working with communities, but this was specialising it. It was that extra thing that I was talking about over and above the day job.
I'll ask our policing board member to pursue those in the proper place.
Alex, we heard you got off the policing board for good behaviour.
Early release scheme.
Obviously everywhere.
Better jobs we did.
Okay. Sammy Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. I suppose that I was elected in 2011, and one of the things that I've experienced over during that time is that there's always a crisis. Well, there's quite a number of crises during that time. Very often those crises just come up to bite you, and they can be different levels. But this process, there will be crisis. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I'm just wondering, have we, measures in place for dealing with such a crisis? Because that can be, it can be elevated in terms of social media as well. And secondly, maybe this dovetails into it. Let me just paint a scenario, hypothetical, but it probably will happen. In that, on one hand, we could be funding some of these agencies and community voluntary organisations to be working in these areas. Let's just take the whole paramilitary influence, and there could be good work, progress made with people who want to go off the stage. But on the other hand, you have a security response that could be going to those people's doors and kicking their doors in for something that happened, you know, a year ago or 2 years ago, and that is a reality. And obviously we're all saying if there's people involved in crime, whatever, let the police deal with it. So in one sense, you could be mitigating against, you know, funding a project or people to go away, and the other hand fund a securities response as well.
I mean, you're right. This is about communities in transition and helping people move away, but what it's not is a whitewashing of people did in the past. And if that criminality is identified, then the police have no choice but to pursue it, take it through, and the courts will do through the prosecution service what they have to do. But there's a lot of people there who have already served their time, done their period of time, they're ex-prisoners. They want to move on, they want to shift into a different world. And as I say, that sort of work has been going on since the Belfast Agreement of '98. So this is another way to help that work. And probably more so in the Loyalist community more than in the Republican Nationalist side of it, because there has been much more obvious issues with the UDA, the UVF, South Antrim, this, that and the other. We know that those groups have been more active in that sort of field, and it is about working. Now, we know DR's there, and the national security money is going in to dealing with them and trying to take that forward as well. But part of this work would be to try and stop young kids getting drawn into those groups, Nationalist or Republican or Loyalist or Unionist, whatever way you'd want to label them. It's actually trying to have a seismic shift. And 5 years, as you've mentioned, is a very short time frame, and what we're really doing is trying to change a curve here. If you ask me, hand in heart, will all of these groups be gone in 5 years' time? I honestly don't know, but it will be a struggle to do it. But what we will be doing is making them certainly much less attractive and giving people opportunities to go in different directions, and hopefully they will wither on the vine. But that's the aim, is to try and deal with these programmes within 5 years, and that's certainly what we're going to try and do.
And if you go back to the whole decommissioning, some areas, you know, got off the ground in terms of decommission. It took others, you know, considerable years later to decommission. Not saying to decommission everything, far from it. And that's going to be the reality. And as an ex-prisoner said to me recently, well, in terms of fresh start, what is the end result? I'm saying, well, it's for paramilitary organisations to go away, but it cannot happen in 2 years, it can happen in 3 years. You know? And he said to me, well, how will you know that they've gone away? Big question.
It is a big question, and I can't give you an easy answer to it. I mean, some of the measures will be the IRC in terms of how they look at it, what they say. If you have people walking down a road and they aren't getting saluted for being the brigadier of this, that or the other, or the commander of this, that or the other, or the active service unit of this, that or the other, you know, all of those things, I think it's one of those things you'll feel it as much as know it. And certainly that will be some of the approaches. There will be harder measures, and we will have a look to see how many people the police have done under particular criminal. There's a real sense that in a lot of these particular groups, they're much more engaged in criminality than they are actually in any sense of, you know, heroic struggle. And it's making sure that those labourers are being taken away and they're dealt with as the criminals that they are, because drug dealers perhaps will not want to leave the stage. People involved in prostitution, racketeering, extortion, you know, this £50 million is never going to shift them out of those particular fields. That's why there will be a law enforcement element. The police, the NCA and other statutory bodies will take forward. But as I say, a lot of the work will also be trying to stop the lifeline of new people joining those groups, young kids becoming involved in them or idolising them.
And just finally, Chair, you made a very good point earlier on in terms of other organisations, other funders such as the Urban Villages, EBUC or whatever, but it's also important as well in terms of, you know, trying to give opportunities for training and job opportunities for some of those young people who sign up to the paramilitaries and never
Department of Education, Department of the Economy, trying to develop and grow skills. Actually, the best way out of all of this, for me, and this is a personal view, is a job, giving people some sense of self-respect and a way to go forward. So for me, the best way, it's the same as poverty, the best way is education and employment. And if you can get those right, things start to look after themselves.
Just on the point about disbandment and how we understand that, the panel had a go at describing what that might look like. And then their report is really structured around the 4 barriers to getting to that point. So lawfulness, transition, criminality and systemic issues. So we keep taking ourselves back to the panel report all the time because...
Systemic stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Doug Beattie.
Chair, thank you. Anthony, it's a marathon session, I know, and I'm sorry if I might be going back over a little bit of old ground here. But just whenever you get the bids in, am I right in saying when the bid comes in, that bid will come in with all their delivery partners sort of outlined on what the delivery partner is going to do? So, for example, the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, who is getting nearly £500,000, you will know all of their delivery partners?
Well, we would be looking for a business case. It's a business justification, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, who they're going to do it with. Some of them will be single bids and some of them will have delivery partners and will have identified. Going forward, when we get into the commissioning side of it, I think that's where we're going to see more of the co-design and the development of delivery partners going forward. So people like the Housing Executive saying, we will work with this group in this area to deliver X, Y and Z.
And will we be able to get sort of sight of that? You know, will we be able to see who they're using for delivery? I mean, and the reason I ask is, I'm slightly concerned that it's not all joined up. I'll give you an example. If you look at the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, who are doing community empowerment, re-imaging communities and bonfire management, the Fixed Commission, which is the Flags, Identity, Culture and Traditions Commission, they're looking at those exact same things. And at the end of next year, they're going to come up with a series of recommendations. Now, if the Housing Executive are already delivering something and the Commission comes up with something completely different, you know, so they need to be really joined up.
And that's why, as I say, we didn't rush to make 5-year allocations for things. We're trying to see where that goes. Going back to Sammy's question about emergencies and shifts and all the rest of it and crisis, one of the things Karen particularly was very keen when we were setting up this is that we don't go to allocate all of the money in any year in one go, that we do keep a little back for contingencies of what might develop or a new idea that might come up or something we can move on. So we're trying to be as flexible as we can be over the period, but certainly any funding or any money that we give be for full transparency, with the exception of the law enforcement side, where some things I might tell you what they're doing, but I can't describe in detail the approaches they're going to take, because that might be sticking up a warning flag to some of these criminal gangs. But certainly other delivery partners highlighting who they are and what they're trying to do, we can look at that.
Katie will correct me if I'm wrong, but the form they fill in when they ask us for money under Fresh Start asks them to say who your partners are, or have you considered a partnership approach?
Have you considered a partnership approach?
Would it be worthwhile us sending you the pro forma so they actually see what we do ask?
That'd be very helpful.
Would be.
Criteria. Yeah.
Yes, we'll send you the criteria and the pro forma, so you'll see what we're asking and then you'll see how we're judging them.
But you will direct them to people who are doing a body of work which is nearly in parallel with them, because I'm still concerned that you know the Housing Executive might now be in the delivery phase come January, and delivering something between January and December to a community, and the community will think this is great, look what they're delivering, and then come December, you know, the Flags Commission turns around and says, well, actually, that's the worst thing you could possibly do, and we're going to have to take it all back.
Doug, you're absolutely right, because the way I'm approaching this is that's why we want representatives of every department, so that people, if we're doing something, can say, actually, you know something, we're about to do something in that field, or this group is. One of the other things that we will do when we get bids in is see if people are bidding in the same area for the same sorts of work. Can they align? Can they do it together? Is there sharing of approaches? And also, I remember working in the health service, we talked about the March Madness, and in one particular hospital, brand new barriers were put the whole way down the main road that went through the hospital because it was a good project, but what nobody told them was 6 months later they were all getting ripped up because they were going to put a new road in. You know, that's exactly the stuff that you're talking about,
exactly.
and we're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that's why I said we're going to look at TBUC, we're going to look at good relations, we're going to look at where we're already funding and doing things in those areas to try and get a more cohesive, greater than the sum of the parts result of that.
And I guess it's that sort of due diligence, because I know, for example, it will become a contentious issue when we talk about monies that's going towards bonfire management. You know, we all know what that means, but you know, when you come to practical terms of money being handed out to bonfires, it becomes a contentious issue, especially if somebody's recommending against it. But can I ask you then a very direct question, because you've said that you pretty much know who the delivery partners are going to be, and it's back to this NCA. Has any of the department organisations requested money so they can use what the NCA has to offer? In other words, is any money going to the NCA?
The police are working with them at the moment to come up with a bid to actually take work forward.
So in this 4 million that's now been allocated...
There's none of that is to the NCA, there's none of it to HMRC or any non-devolved body. All of that 4 million is at this point being spent on Northern Ireland based bodies.
And does that not strike you as slightly strange? Because the NCA really do bring tactical and strategic intelligence in regards to organised crime and in regards to paramilitaries, and yes, they will be doing this body of work anyway because that's part of their remit, but in this particular thing, do you not think that's strange?
Well, to be honest, one of the things we were trying to do was make sure that through the system we could actually fund bids from the NCA, and that's the process that we've come round in, because you're absolutely right. I mean, one of my other day jobs is that I look after the strategic group for the Organised Crime Task Force. The Minister's the head of it, but operationally I'm the man in there trying to make sure that all of these bodies are working together. They can't do it in isolation. The HMRC, the NCA, UK Border Force, they all have a role in dealing with organised crime, and some or other them will all have roles in work for Fresh Start, depending on the programmes that are developed. I fully understand, fully recognise and fully accept the NCA has a role here, and I would be expecting them to be part of that going forward.
And that has to fit in with their proper role in support of the Chief Constable and proper accountability.
Yeah.
So we envisage that any money going to the NCA would be part of a bid by PSNI that said, and part of this money PSNI would then allocate to the NCA for particular support, but we wouldn't envisage a direct bid into us from NCA.
Yes, it's a circuitous route to actually get the outcome that we all know we need.
Yeah, you fixed the bidding process that we had issues with a while back, you know, on that couple of things, but you fixed that bidding process. But now we're sitting with that bidding process fixed. Is it not time to go back to the PSNI and say, listen, and I'm not saying throw money, but we still have that £1 million of this sort of round that, you know, had you known that this was the bidding process, would you have bid for money for the NCA? Had they known that this was going to be the fixing process?
The lead-in time for NCA to gear up to do additional work for us on Fresh Start, they've got to get people, they've got to get themselves organised, they've got to make sure that they're delivering what the Chief Constable wants. That takes a little bit of time. So we've had a couple of conversations. I'm meeting with NCA colleagues tomorrow. I think it's more realistic to assume that by 1st of April, PSNI will know what they want NCA to do. If we rush at it now, we'll put money towards maybe slightly the wrong things, or we'll not get accountability right, and then we'll be in terrible difficulties.
I would imagine that we will be getting bids after Christmas for what people want to spend in the new year. We won't be doing it in June. People will want to begin from the 1st of April going forward. Now, that's where I would be expecting the bid to come in from PSNI with the NCA involvement, setting out specifically what both groups will do, giving the NCA time to gear up, to recruit the people, to base them in Northern Ireland, to actually go forward.
And I'm not one to labour it, Anthony, and I get exactly what you mean, but the NCA were geared up. They had put a bid in. They were getting people ready. This is all. They had already done that. It was us that took them out of the bidding process, so they had already geared themselves up for that.
No, I don't think that is true. What they did was a speculative bid saying this is what we could do this time last year to the NIO. I mean, I did make the point when I came to the Justice Committee with the Minister, we've never got a bid or seen the bid that the NCA put through to the PSNI.
Yeah.
We might have seen it, but we certainly didn't get that as an official bid to us. That was part of the discussions that led up to Fresh Start, which was agreed in December.
Yeah.
The NIO decided not to put it forward. Some of the bids that did go forward, like the FSNI machinery, were actually on the document itself, in the Fresh Start document. That's why we were able to fund it and agree it 1st of April, because we knew we had the money, we knew it was a commitment, and we were able to do that. The NCA wasn't in there. We have been talking to them throughout, but we have never received a bid directly from them. There was confusion as to whether this money could go to them, and technically they can never make a direct bid. They can't make a bid coming in. It has to be through a delivery partner that is Northern Ireland based, so the PSNI is the most likely. We had to cross those hurdles, and they knew there was no point in them just dusting down the bid and sticking it in and saying, there you go, because we told them at the moment, the way it was structured, they couldn't actually bid directly. We've got through all of that. We found a route to doing that. They now need to gear themselves up, but they were never geared up to do it. It was more, this is what we could do, this is what we would want to do, and that's now what they're discussing with the PSNI.
Right, thank you.
No problem.
I think it would be very useful. You'll be glad to know one thing. I think what we should do is, maybe, if I could propose that we have an hour briefing on the Organised Crime Task Force. That would give us an understanding of the bigger picture of organised crime in Northern Ireland, and then it will help inform when we're looking at the Fresh Start moving forward.
Chair, I wonder whether that might help Mr Atwood then, if he wanted us back quickly. If we came back to do organised crime,
yes,
prior to coming back on Fresh Start, I think that would be really good context.
Yeah.
And that would be certainly me.
Anthony's overjoyed.
I'm smiling, Mr Chairman, because when Brian and Gary came, they asked me did I want to have the centre seat there as well, because the work they're doing on that is for me.
Yes.
And I thought it was better because I knew this might last a little while, and I didn't think I could survive the centre chair for that length of time. So I'm more than happy to come and speak about the work of the Organised Crime Task Force.
That'll be useful. Really.
Just thinking, Kurt, we're still coming back early December. Or
oh yes, it's not a replacement.
Yeah.
No, I think what Karen's indicating is that I might come in November and talk to you about organised crime, or do it on the one day, whichever is easier for yourselves. Okay.
But whilst we enjoy your company, Anthony,
you have a busy work programme. I fully understand.
Some of the member parts of the Organised Task Force also. I think that would be very.
It depends on precisely which ones and whether they can come to a Justice Committee. Is that something we might explore with the clerk?
I think we should explore that. Just
yes, I mean it depends. If it's 3, 4, yeah, it's going to get quite tight.
Yeah.
Maybe I could do now. Just give you a quick run through who's on the Organised Crime Task Force. It takes me all of a few seconds.
Yeah. Okay. I'm worried about quorum, but go on ahead.
That's the point I'm going to make, because on it. On the big group that the Minister chairs, there's law enforcement agencies, both devolved and non-devolved. There's business and community, and there's ourselves. In terms of the task force group that I look after, it's all of the law enforcement agencies. So you would have the PSNI, HMRC, the NCA, UK Border Force, Home Office, because they do the immigration side of it. I'm not sure those non-devolved bodies could come. Certainly the police can come and we can come, but I think it would be difficult for me to ask the NCA to appear directly before you.
Well, maybe try and work through with the
yes, we'll work through.
We would like to see as many as possible, if at all, because I know that they're forming this. If they've came before, and we'll see just what we can do.
Well, yes, and what I was going to say is I don't see there would be any reason why the Justice Committee, I mean I can discuss this with the Minister, couldn't attend one of the task force meetings.
Yes. Where
you could come in and actually see and take part in part of that meeting, the meeting that the Minister chairs.
Okay, yeah, that would be very useful. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I know you've been here an awful long time, as have we, but very, very interesting. As I say, this is a priority for us, one of our priorities. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, members, anyone want to discuss anything just before we move on? This has been a marathon session on this specific topic. It is one of our priorities. Anybody want to add to what we've discussed? Now, I know that we've had, Alexa says we want really 2 months. Now, I don't think we should set that in stone because that'll put pressure on us as a forward work programme also, but I think we should keep 2 regular intervals and oral sessions, but we'll not put it down in stone as 2 months because I'd worry about gaps of recess and stuff like that and what we want to do other than with our other priorities. So he's happy enough that we'll be determined to try and meet them as often as possible in that time scale, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. If we don't meet within 2 months, there's not going to be a buzzer go off. No. Okay, members happy?
Yes.
Okay, moving on then. Agenda item number 8 is the SL1, the Attorney General for Northern Ireland's draft guidance for the PSNI, the PPS and the Forensic Science Northern Ireland on Human Rights standards relevant to cooperation and operational independence. Can I refer members to pages 217 of the meeting pack? Can I remind members that at the meeting on the 29th of September, the committee agreed that it was content with the Attorney General's draft guidance for the Police Service of Northern Ireland, the Public Prosecution Service and the Forensic Science Northern Ireland on human rights standard relevant to cooperation and operational independence. And I advise members that the guidance was laid in Assembly on the 5th of October and the Attorney General has now provided information on the proposed statutory rule which will be subject to the negative resolution procedure to bring the guidance into operation on the 19th of December 2016. Can I seek the views of members on whether they are content with the proposed statutory rule or whether any further information is required? Members content? Okay. Agenda item number 9 then, correspondence. I inform members that there are 9 items of correspondence at pages 240 onwards and 2 items at pages 7 to 11 of the table pack. And I advise members that I will draw their attention to 4. Item 4 on page 262 of the meeting pack. Can I advise members that an invitation has been received from the Northern Ireland Policing Board to a meeting of the Business Crime Forum in conjunction with Lisburn and Castlereagh Policing and Community Safety Partnership, and that's to discuss the prevention and protection strand of the 2016-17 Business Crime Action Plan, which is being held on Thursday the 27th of October at Island Civic Centre, Lisburn at 7 p.m. Can I ask members to advise the clerk if they wish to attend? Item number 6, page 264. An invitation has been received from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission to its annual statement launch on Thursday the 8th of December in the Long Gallery, Parliament Buildings at 10:30 a.m. Again, please, members, if you could advise the clerk if you wish to attend. Item number 8 at pages 266 of the meeting pack and item number 11 at page 7 of the tabled pack. Can I advise members that further correspondence has been received from Mr McMaster regarding his individual complaint of maladministration against the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland? Mr McMaster is asking the committee to make a recommendation of maladministration against the Police Ombudsman and to write directly to the Minister of Justice to get him an appointment to discuss his case. Can I remind members that at the meeting on the 15th of September, the committee agreed to write and advise Mr McMaster to provide any new evidence relating to his case directly to the Minister of Justice and ask her to consider the matter afresh, given that the Department of Justice has responsibility for considering complaints of maladministration against the Police Ombudsman's Office. Also, members, I believe that Mr McMaster has booked in a surgery date for my constituency surgery tomorrow, so I'll be meeting him and I'll explain that to him also. But can I ask members then if they are content that all appropriate action has now been taken in relation to this matter, and if so, Mr McMaster will be informed that the committee has already advised him on the appropriate action to take if he has new evidence of maladministration, and that therefore does not intend, this committee does not intend to respond to any further correspondence. Are members content?
Great.
Okay. Item number 12 then, at page 13 of the table pack. Can I advise members that an invitation has been received from the Law Centre Northern Ireland to its 2016 Social Justice Lecture by Baroness Hale, Deputy President of the Supreme Court on Social Justice and Human Rights at the Spires Conference Centre, Belfast at 2 to 4 p.m. on Friday 21st of October Can I ask members to advise the clerk if they wish to attend the event? Can I ask members if they are content to action the other items of correspondence as outlined in the meeting pack, or whether they have any comments to make on any of them? Members content? Okay, agenda item number 10 then. We're nearly done, members. Chairperson's business. Item number 1, we an informal meeting with family mediation. Can I inform members that I and the Deputy Chairperson met with representatives of the NSPCC, Colin Reid, Family Mediation, NI and NICFA this morning to discuss a proposal to place family mediation in private family law cases on a statutory footing. This approach has been endorsed by Lord Justice Gillen's draft report on family justice. Can I advise members that the proposal sits within the committee's key priority area of problem-solving courts and justice structures and systems, and raises some interesting issues. A briefing paper provided at the committee at the meeting has been circulated at page 13 of the tabled pack. Could I seek the agreement of members to schedule an oral briefing on the proposal, after which the committee will decide or can decide whether it wishes to take forward work on this area? Members agreed? Item number 2, informal meeting with Autism NI and the National Autistic Society. Can I advise members that I and the Deputy Chairperson met with Arlene Cassidy, CEO of Autism NI, and Sherelle Stewart, Director of the National Autistic Society NI, to discuss the Broken Promises report on the implementation of the strategy and action plan resulting from the Autism Act. So, member, Pam, you were there. Do you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, Chair. Well, both is just declare interest as Chair of the APG in autism. But it was a good meeting. Obviously, quite aware of the issues, and I know certainly from an APG we're trying to go through committees to try and glean some information from the departments as to what's being done in regard to the implementation of the Autism Act. So. I think there was a request from them to write to the department to see where the Department of Justice is on the Autism Act and what they've done, and then I think we can look at it from there.
So members, if you're clear, we'll write to the. Can I propose, or Pam maybe propose, that we write to the Department of Justice to ask them about progress on the Autism Act NI 2011 and see what comes back. Okay, members content? Item number 3 then, an informal meeting with Alicia Perry. Can I remind members that at the meeting on the 15th September, the committee agreed to hold an informal meeting with Alicia Perry, who requested to brief the committee on domestic violence, domestic abuse and coercive control from a survivor's perspective. Can I inform members that the informal meeting will take place on Tuesday the 25th of October at 12:45 p.m. in room 30. Can I ask members just to advise the clerk if they intend to go to this meeting? Some of us may well have met Alicia this week, with regards to the motion.
That's just what it is she's wanting to follow up on from that.
She just wants to tell us or inform us more at the committee about, from a survivor's perspective.
Has she presented the committee already?
No. She had written and asked to meet with the committee, and the committee had agreed to hold an informal meeting because she wanted to talk from a survivor's perspective. They thought that forum would be better, so this is the informal meeting. I think it was slightly overtaken then because the motion was selected and was on the order paper, and she was lobbying and meeting with members separately anyway. Yeah. But this would be the committee.
And what time's that on Tuesday?
12:45 in room 30, Tuesday 25th of October. Okay, members content then to move on?
Yep. Thank you.
Can I also inform members that myself and the Deputy Chairperson Pam held a very useful introductory meeting with the Attorney General and with the Chairperson and Vice Chairperson of the Northern Ireland Policing Board earlier this week, and both of those meetings were very useful. I spent a lot of time discussing issues, so it's very good. Very useful, and we agreed to make sure, especially with the Policing Board, that we keep communication lines open, keep comms up. Okay, agenda item number 11 then is any other business. Does any members want to raise any other issues? If not, then the agenda item number 12 is date and time, and that's Thursday, 27th of October 2016 at 2 p.m. in room 30, Parliament Buildings. Can I just thank all the members for sticking it through the course today? A very important issue, very long session, but we got through there.
30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.